Good morning once again, colleagues. Those who have just joined in, I'm going to be the moderator for the day for this webinar. I am from the Nedle constituency. Now, we're going to begin with our program, and the reason why we're going to begin is so that we're not found wanting as the day goes on. We have got a very tight program that requires us to basically be strict with our time allocations. So do allow me to proceed, and there will be more guests and participants that are going to be joining as we proceed. I hope the acting CEO, in the chart, just so that like Tabiseng and team is aware, there's already like an indication, and I am also afraid that the video is not enabled. So the presenters are going to need the video, and they're also gonna need to be able to share their presentations. So let's basically attend to that. Now, without further ado, I will actually hand over to Mr. Bongani Magongo, the acting CEO of the National Development Agency. Over to you, Mr. Magongo.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Ndlovu. And let me, and the organizers of this webinar, let me first welcome all the panelists that have agreed to talk and give us their insight in this first webinar of this financial year that we had organized. And I would want to welcome all the participants that have logged in, took their time to log in today to participate in this discussion. This is a very important discussion given where we are as a country. And I think we need to recalibrate how we put a buffer around our unstable economy. And this is not only affecting South Africa, the entire world is in an economic turbulence. And you need to have some kind of very clear interventions that when economic turbulence comes, what kind of strategies and programs do you have to just sustain the economy at a level within which it doesn't become extremely dangerous for the population? Cooperatives are known and they have proven to be a better buffer for economic turbulence. Many countries that have really had a significant contribution from cooperatives have managed to weave through such turbulence without affecting too much the very poor. And cooperatives are one of the vehicles that I don't think we had really had a strategy and thought through. How can they assist us, one, in growing our economy so that they've got a significant contribution in the total GDP of this country is very, very low. And their participation in the economy has not been properly structured in such a way that people that are in that sector, they actually see themselves as major players in driving the direction of the economy. And the reason that we actually went on this study was to look at the policies. How can our current policies be recalibrated such that they support cooperatives as they support what we define as formal economies in the private sector, whether you talk about SSME or micro or businesses. We have very good systems to manage that part of the economy, but we've got very poor systems and policies to manage the economy that is run by cooperatives at the same level, at the same respect, and at the same recognition as we do with big business, medium-sized businesses, and even small businesses, by the way. And we interchange these words with cooperatives. Cooperatives are very specific, and they thrive on building abilities of local economies to actually improve community-based economy. And they buffer the competition that comes with private businesses, private individual businesses, because they can adjust their pricing, they can adjust their production pipeline, they can even adjust with the markets at the time when things are not going well for individuals and families. So I think at a point we need to rethink how together we look at the policies that are supportive to grow this industry. And I'm glad that the first webinar on policy issues starts with the role of cooperatives in the reconstruction of our economy. I'm not sure whether they are part of it currently, and if they are part of it, at what level are they actually being given the platform to openly play their role and do business freely like any other business, and they're not seen as part of some kind of non-profit organization operating in this country. They're businesses, and they need to actually occupy their space, and they're run by ordinary people like myself and yourselves. And they can create large amount of economic activities and employment opportunities, probably better than the current systems that we have, that we look at in creating job opportunities and reducing poverty. So I would like to welcome all the speakers and the participants, and I wish everyone well and a very good debate and a very good engagement. With this just short welcome remarks, Mr. Program Director, can I take the platform back to you so that we have got enough time to debate? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Magongo, the acting CEO of the NDA. And I think you've actually set the tone quite nicely. I'm not going to, and with every speaker, I'm not going to continuously summarize what has been said, but I just think that of importance is the fact that we are acknowledging that we are meeting at a time when there's a global economic crisis and there is a need for response. And in South Africa, we have got a response that we call Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And in that, there's strategies and programs, as the CEO, acting CEO has indicated, that actually are supposed to be including or like enabling the role of cooperatives in participating in economic response, and in fact, mitigating the impacts of the global economic crisis as well as the economic crisis in the country, in particular in communities. And there's like concerns already that you are raising, the fact that sometimes when people speak about startups, SMMEs, and informal traders, they then basically think that is used interchangeably with the word cooperatives. Now, we're going to have a lot of presentations, and I do hope from the point of moderation that by the end of the session today, we will be wiser, at least as the country and the social partners and participants here. We will be wiser about the role of the cooperatives are already playing and the role that the cooperatives should be playing. I will request that the program be projected once again. Now, we're going to basically cover all these areas that the CEO has spoken to as he sets the tone for today's webinar. And we do actually hope that this is only the beginning. The conversation is going to get deepened as the time goes on. And in fact, we will begin like to have a focus, a more clearer focus on the role of cooperatives. Now, as I was saying, if you could just project the program once again. Our next speaker is gonna be Miss Kwati Koka, the sector manager at agribusiness, mining and mineral beneficiation at CEDA and the Department of Small Business Development. The topic that Ms. Koka is going to be addressing is Cooperative Development Support Program interventions. Now, we will hand over to you. We are trying to recover the time. We are not doing bad, like, because we started about 5 minutes late, but we're quite about 17 minutes past, and we're already receiving the presentation that was supposed to happen at 15:15. So we hope that the speakers, we know they've got a lot of, or panelists, they've got a lot of issues to raise, but we're just going to request so that like we finish on time and we allow for conversations as well. We'll request that they keep into the allocated time. Over to you, Ms. Koka.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present on behalf of the Department of Small Business Development. Am I allowed to switch on my camera so that I can get the presentation on the screen?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Today I will be representing the Department of Small Business Development together with the Department of Small Enterprise Development and also the Department of and also SEFA, Small Enterprise Development Agency. I was just disturbed by a message here to say I must share. I thought they were going to share from that side. Thank you very much. As I said, I am going to be presenting on the Cooperative Development Support Program, representing the three entities. A little bit about the Department of Small Business Development. The Ministry of Small Business was established in 2014, marking a turning point in the history of cooperative development in South Africa. We realized that with that, government demonstrated a commitment to place SMMEs and cooperatives at the center of economic growth and job creation. The Department of Small Business was thereafter established as a standalone national department in accordance with the reorganization of some national departments announced by the President in May 2014. Within the Department of Small Business Development, there are two entities reporting to the Minister of Small Business Development. That's the Small Enterprise Finance Agency and Small Enterprise Development Agency, which is SEDA. The agencies report through governance arrangements that give them autonomy, but also enable them to align their strategies to government policy and priorities. The department has been created basically to create an enabling environment that is conducive to the development and growth of SMMEs and cooperatives. The creation and expansion of economic opportunities for enterprises, previously disadvantaged citizens, i.e. Black people, women, youth, and people with disabilities and underdeveloped regions. Fostering entrepreneurship and innovation through skills development and business support services. Enhancing the competitiveness and productivity of enterprises through promotion of access to appropriate technologies, enabling infrastructure and skills, and also improving the efficiency of organizational and institutional arrangements. Those are the objectives of the department. Basically, the purpose of the department is to create an enabling environment for the growth and development of cooperatives through the development and review of policy and legislation and provision of enhanced support service utilizing improved institutional arrangements. Also enhance financial and non-financial support services to create and expand economic opportunities for co-ops, prioritizing Black people, women, youth, and people living with disabilities and underdeveloped regions. Also, to enhance the competitiveness and productivity of co-ops through the provision of access to appropriate technologies, enabling infrastructure and skills access. Cooperative development and growth is pursued with the aim of contributing towards growing employment, reducing poverty and inequality in South Africa. The department's strategic objectives mainly is to grow all types and forms of cooperatives and institutions, as well as increase their GDP contribution, employment creation, reduce poverty, and aid economic transformation. Enhance financial support services for cooperatives through SEFA, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, and also to enhance non-financial support services for cooperatives through SEDA, Small Enterprise Development Agency. Strengthen the cooperative sustainability by advocating the purchase of cooperatives, products and services by state institutions. Also to enhance sustainability of cooperatives by providing cooperative education and training, access to information, as well as provision of technological and business infrastructure support. The key principle is to strive to promote a cooperative development model that combines financial, non-financial, and access to market, i.e. available massive public procurement and linking cooperatives to private sector value chains, support towards the development of cooperatives. Also, another principle to align, coordinate, and integrate institutional support mechanism at all three spheres of government. To strive to promote partnership model involving government, private sector, and civil society with the view to leverage civil society and private sector resources towards the development of cooperatives. To strive to develop the entire collective entrepreneurship of cooperative life cycle from pre-formation to internalization. Aligning cooperatives that need a turnaround strategy will be considered. To strive to promote a cooperative development model that combines financial, non-financial, and access to market, public procurement, and linking cooperatives to private sector value chain, support towards the development of cooperative enterprises. To also target and prioritize the following key sectors in growing cooperatives enterprises footprint in the economy: primary agriculture, agro-processing, consumer cooperatives, construction, textile, arts and crafts, mining, financial services, and mining sector. Conduct leading-edge research coupled with annual and 10-year reviews and impact assessments of the cooperative strategy and its programs, as well as performance regarding cooperative development in the economy. Now I'm going to move into the departmental programs. The department has introduced a cooperative development support program. This program is objectives is to support cooperatives enterprises financially and non-financially. The Cooperative Act 14 of 2005 and Cooperatives Amended Act number 6 of 2013 and the Integrated Cooperative Strategy provide the legal basis for the development of this program. In partnership with CIFA, the Cooperative Development Support Program offers blended finance to eligible cooperatives on cost-sharing funding of a combination of a grant and a loan. The grant funding portion is capped at 70% of the total approved funding, while the loan portion is capped at 30% of the total approved funding. The total funding is limited to 2.5 million towards qualifying activities that will be outlined later. The grant support is available for machinery, equipment, infrastructure, commercial vehicles, and business development support necessary to grow cooperative enterprises to ensure that cooperative enterprises will develop and be sustainable and be able to compete with other enterprises. The eligible enterprises will be primary cooperatives. As a primary cooperatives, they must satisfy all mandatory requirements as said below, be incorporated and registered in South Africa in terms of Cooperatives Act 14 of 2005 as amended, be a primary cooperative with a majority Black membership, have business activities in any sector, adhere to cooperative principle, be biased towards women, youth, and people with disabilities, expected to furnish proof of training or experience of all members of the primary cooperatives in the area of cooperative governance, business management, and technical training in fulfillment of the agreement entered with the Cooperative Development Support Program. The next part of the eligible enterprises will be the cluster cooperatives. To be eligible, they must also satisfy the mandatory requirements. Be registered as a cooperative in South Africa, and as amended, be a secondary cooperative with a majority of Black membership, have business activities in any sector, adhere to cooperative principles, be biased towards women, youth, and people with disabilities, expected to furnish proof of training or experience of all members of the primary cooperative in the area of cooperative governance, business management, technical training, and fulfillment of the agreement entered with CDSP. Primary cooperative registered under secondary cooperative must satisfy all the mandatory requirements. The qualifying interventions for blended finance will be machinery and equipment, tools, specialized tools, operational costs, commercial vehicles, infrastructure requirements, product and service development, business development support, market development, information and communication technology linked to the cooperative development activities. The adjudication committee may consider for support at its own discretion any other costs related to the activities applied for. For feasibility study, there will be operational costs that include, among others, project personnel, researchers, and so forth. Specialist technical, scientific consultation, contracting, and personnel. Running costs and overheads, printing and telephone to a maximum of 10% of the total budget. Intellectual property rights, IPR for the project relevant to the National Intellectual Property Management Office, and the project relevant legislation that will be followed. Cost of registration and litigation of patents, cost of registration of patents will also be covered by this scheme. The application procedure, who can apply? The applicant must register on the SMME SA database. There's the link that one can use. Complete the simplified online application form available. Be an entity registered with CIPC, including e.g. Constitution, CR10, be 100% owned by a South African. Priority will be given to cooperatives owned by women, youth, and people living with disabilities. FICA documents, municipal accounts, letters from traditional authorities, and so forth. Lease agreements and permission to occupy. CVs of certified ID copies of directors and founding members will be required for this. 3 months bank statements, detailed business plan, 3-year cash flow projection, latest annual financial statement and management account, not older than 3 months, relevant industry certification where applicable, details of loan facilities, be willing to participate in the DSBD CEDA facilitated business development process, be in the township or peri-urban or rural or small towns, to prevent double dipping, the applicant must submit a sworn affidavit regarding support received from the state in the 5-year period preceding the application. So CIFA is the one that is responsible for this funding at the stage, because the loan will be managed and monitored by CIFA. About CEDA, who are we? Our mission, basically, as CEDA, is to increase our contribution of small enterprise to South African economy, economic growth, job creation, and equity, according to the National Small Business Act 1996 as amended. To be a center of excellence for small enterprise development in South Africa, and also to promote entrepreneurship and facilitate the development of small enterprises by providing customized business support services that result in business growth and sustainability in collaboration with other role players in the ecosystem. CEDA has an enterprise support network. We have more than 54 CEDA branches and more than 77 core locations where you can get CEDA services. I've got a map there that you can slightly see where we are. We have also 101 CEDA technology and TVET incubators. Within CEDA, what we are doing, we provide the non-financial support. I will talk about them in the next slide, where we talk about business talk, business start, business build, and business growth. Our operational model goes as follows. There is a process flow where we attract clients, we engage them, We assess them and diagnose their businesses using different type of tools. We've got business advisors and regional facilitators who are specifically there to assist cooperatives. We also do intervention and support services. We use service providers, consultants, and other CEDA divisions and partners for us to be able to deliver the work that we are mandated to do. We also do improvement assessment and impact assessment for the cooperatives. CEDA supports all sectors of industry while we prioritize the key growth sectors in the provinces. We support different type of profit-oriented legal entities, from sole proprietors to private companies to cooperatives and collectively owned enterprises. The business level that we are utilizing, basically, we do business talk where we have information session, registration of clients, and advice. This we provide to all the enterprises and the cooperatives included. We go to the start where we use our tools to assess the businesses, those that are registered and those that are not registered. We do business build where we look at technical training, quality management systems, certification, HACCP, quality standards, innovation support, export mentorship support, supply development program, and look at the incentive scheme like the CSDP. We need to look at those cooperatives that will apply for CSDP and make sure that they are ready to send their application to CIFA. We also look at business growth, where we provide mentorship and coaching, small enterprise coaching program, women enterprise coaching, incentives, other incentive schemes that we use in order to support SMMEs and cooperatives within the manufacturing sector. Also access to market, e-commerce, trade fairs, B2B, domestic markets, and so forth. That's the client journey that we take. The other products and services, I've already mentioned some of them. We do the business diagnosis, access to incentives, international competitive programs and export marketing, management system implementation, product accreditation, joint venture and business-to-business facilitation, technology transfer.
Ms. Coker,
Yes.
I'll request you to move faster. We are actually like
yes, I am. I'm looking at the time. Thank you, sir. All right. Mentorship, trade show, access to markets. So for each and every one or all the cooperatives that will need assistance, they can come to CEDA and we'll take them through the process. About CIFA, CIFA has a particular position in the market. Their priority target group is youth, entrepreneurs with disability, military veterans entrepreneurs, women, enterprise in rural communities and township, and Black entrepreneurs. They are addressing market failures by looking at assisting with the finance from startup businesses, target smaller loans below 500,000, provision of pre and post loan support. Also, there will be your own contribution in order for you to access the CIFA facilities. This is the operational model. As you can see, the SMME and cooperatives, distribution channels, the banks, the cooperative financial institution, microfinance intermediary, retail financial institution, CIFA offices, CIFA co-location, and other strategic partners, where they do direct lending and they also do wholesale lending. And they also provide other support services like post-investment management, workout and restructuring of business and technical support, institutional strengthening, and fund management. I think I've covered everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coker. As you can see, like all the participants can see, we're starting on a very good note. We're sharing the information that is quite practical and the assistance that is immediately available to cooperatives. There will be a chance for all of us to have questions and answers as well as discussion. Now I'm just going to be allowing the presentations to happen back to back. The next presenter for us is Mr. Mondli Mbele of the Department of Social Development. He is an acting chief director on poverty alleviation, sustainable livelihoods, and food security at the Department of Small Business Development. Mr. Mbele, I don't know whether you are projecting your own presentation or it has to be shared by Ntabiseng, but over to you, Mr. Mbele. The topic is DSD interventions towards strengthening of cooperatives. Yeah, over to you, Mr. Mbele.
Good morning to the meeting, and thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity. Thank you for introducing me that way. I am indeed the acting chief director for community development, sustainable livelihoods, and food security. However, I'm in social development, not small business. And by the way, my acting is only for 2 weeks when my boss is on leave. I'm really honored for the platform under the title that we are given on behalf of my DDG, Mr. Nechipale, DSD interventions towards a strengthening of cooperatives. I will share the screen from my side. If you can confirm whether you can see my screen, I will appreciate that. Please give me an indication whether you can see my screen.
Mr. Mbele, sorry, just a moment. I wanted to request everybody else, we can see your screen. I just wanted to request everybody else that if you are not presenting, please switch off everybody must switch off their videos. You can go on then, Mr. Mbele.
Chair, thank you so much. If I can check whether you want to see my video.
Just to say hi so that everybody knows who's talking.
Okay. Thank you so much. I can't see myself this side. I don't know what's happening. Can you see my video? Oh, there it is. Yeah, at least I'm not at home in my pajamas. I'm in the office. That's Mondli Mbele from the Department of Social Development. I must say I'm with my two colleagues here, the Director for Sustainable Livelihoods, Miss Emma Tabane, and I'm also with a colleague also from the Sustainable Livelihoods, Miss Patricia Mokwala, who are supporting me. Okay, allow me to switch off this video now and then talk to my presentation quickly. Thank you. So the outline, as you can see, will look at the background and context, and will look at the role of DSD in supporting cooperatives, and then the rationale of why are we doing this. And then we'll also look at the food and nutrition security interventions to support the poor and the vulnerable, and also try to have linkages in how the programs such as the Household Food and Nutrition Security Program support the cooperatives within the sector, and then we'll make the concluding remarks. Colleagues, this work for us is not just ad hoc work. It emanates even from the ministers. Yes, sir. Yes, yes,
Can
sir.
you make it a slideshow, please? Can you please make it a slideshow?
Okay. There it is. There it is. Apologies. Okay, this work, colleagues, I was saying it is in the minister's performance agreement. I will pick on a couple of interventions that have been outlined there, which is creating sustainable community development interventions, foster vibrant and sustainable communities, create vibrant and sustainable communities in our country. And you can see the indicators there. Of course, there is the social protection elements towards the poor and the vulnerable, but also we are seeking to work with the profiled households which should be empowered through sustainable livelihoods programs. And as such, if you look at the minister's responsibilities, it is to ensure that we have proper and functioning community nutrition and development centers that are linked to provincial food distribution centers. And also we want to see support for the development of the poor and the vulnerable, especially the women and youth, through initiatives such as the Sustainable Livelihoods programs within the department. So if you look at the role of DSD in the cooperatives development work, we are saying cooperatives remain a very essential for the South African economy and globally, and cannot be ignored. Cooperatives can be identified as a positive social and economic dynamic force to building vibrant and empowered communities whilst facilitating stable economic growth. DSD has a strategic intent to develop and implement poverty eradication programs, social protection, and social development amongst the disadvantaged in our country. And then the support to cooperatives is a strategic focus of the department's goal to alleviating poverty, reduce inequality, and unemployment problems that we see in our country. DSD is dedicated to setting aside sustainable portion of goods and services requirements for cooperatives through public procurement. And then the role and strength or capabilities of cooperatives is the identification and linkage to economic opportunities, and then empower communities to actively participate in the total value chain of productive means of generating income and promote sustainable livelihoods in our communities. So if you look at this role, you can see that cooperatives, as we perceive them, is a group of people acting together to meet the common needs and aspiration of its members, sharing, own, and making decisions democratically as guided by the cooperatives legislative framework of this country. So in our view, we have these characteristics of cooperatives, not limited to the ones that we are mentioning here. Number one, the potential to alleviate poverty in our country, promoting mutual understanding and education amongst the members involved, and then also a system of enterprise development that escalates the trading power of members, and also that capability to create short, medium, and long-term jobs for the poor and the vulnerable in our country. More especially if we look in the current economic situation and the fact that our people are not able to find jobs. We need to resort to other alternative means of generating livelihoods. So if you look at DSD, its agencies being SASA and the NDA, and the various programs that we are implementing, in the main, we are seeking to facilitate and coordinate linkages of cooperatives to economic opportunities. As we always talk about the 30% of government procurement by cooperatives as pronounced in relation to the Preferential Procurement Act, that is what we are also supporting to. The facilitation of social mobilization programs on the role and the strength of cooperatives for economic development and building vibrant and empowered communities. Also, the linkage of social protection beneficiaries to economic opportunities through cooperatives themselves, which means our people need to produce something and then contribute to the economy and the development of our country. Facilitate the establishment of cooperatives as an alternative business for job creation and community development. and also link those cooperatives to economic opportunities created through DSD programs and other government departments also, as alluded by my colleague from the Department of Small Business. So that's the rationale through which we as the department are in support of the cooperatives. We see that it can mobilize and develop the entire community and encourage the culture of saving together, people working together, developing themselves, communities being able to create a sustainable livelihoods from themselves, member participation and motivation, and creation of job opportunities, empowering women and youth, very critical. We have a lot of women and youth issues that we need to deal with in terms of economic inclusion. Also, reducing the impact of patriarchy on women and cultural deprivation. It's close to us as social development. Now, when you look into our sector at large, we have a number of interventions that are seeking to protect the most poor and the vulnerable. You look at the child and youth care centers, beneficiaries of our social grants, your drop-in centers, home community-based care centers, early childhood development centers, your grants recipients, especially social relief of distress, older persons through luncheon clubs, the community nutrition and development centers. All these DSD centers are seeking to provide food and nutrition security and also providing psychosocial support to these vulnerable groups. But we are saying here, there is also opportunities for economic development wherein cooperatives can begin to supply different goods and services that are required within the DSD space of work. I'll make an example with the program which I am responsible for. I'm the director, by the way, for food and nutrition security, the House of Food and Nutrition Security Program. We are saying we have capacity for logistical support to ensure procurement of produce from community food producers. Our food programs needs vegetables. Let's source such food from our local cooperatives. Let us train and empower our people to have skills with our technical partners, of course, and other relevant sector development to empower our communities. Let us procure produce and create access to markets for these local food producers. If you look at the provincial food distribution centers, the community food depots, and the various feeding centers, we can, through the food value chain, intersectoral coordination to make sure that our people meaningfully participate. Public procurement, wherein government itself is the first one to buy goods and services from cooperatives. So as such, we can, through strategic food sourcing, for instance, empower cooperatives that are producing commodities that we need within our government centers through sourcing from local cooperatives. In that way, SMMEs and cooperatives and other entities can create local economic development opportunities in our communities. We conceptualize this model with the view that there's the social protection element to it, there's skills development and capacity building, there's employment creation opportunities, enterprise development, agribusiness development opportunities, wherein cooperatives can produce something, that produce be brought together and it goes to our centers. Of course, this is not the work that DSD can do alone, working with agriculture, rural development, small business development under the auspices of the National Food and Nutrition Security Plan. For instance, in our centers, these are the menus. If you look at this simple menu, there are a number of commodities that our cooperatives can begin to look into, produce, and then supply our centers. And in that way, whilst you are meeting the social protection mandate, enabling people access to food, we create sustainable livelihoods opportunities in our communities. There is local economic development, and we create vibrant communities that are not just depending on government, but are creating opportunities for themselves. If you look at this, it's typical training and capacities of our people to prepare food in communities, the distribution logistics to support cooperatives, get that food from local produce, let it go to our distribution centers. Ultimately, it lands in our centers where we serve our people with nutritious food that is produced locally, and our people are empowered. Now, here you have cooks that know what they are doing. You have local food producers that can participate, freshly produced food from our communities, and women participation, local economic development opportunities. Now, in conclusion, DSD is seeking to strengthen local sourcing of goods and services through public procurement to benefit local suppliers, including cooperatives. Number two, we believe if we do this, we'll be able to create sustainable livelihoods, strengthen local economic development, alleviate hunger and poverty, create development opportunities beyond just providing social protection. There is, however, a lot of work we need to do in building cooperatives model and understanding to avert the high rate of failure of cooperatives due to improper formation of cooperatives in our country. I know I end with a very controversial statement there, but we are in full support. I can maybe just thank you, Chair, and the meeting, or rather the seminar, for the opportunity afforded. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mpele. The next presenter is going to be Mr. Olile Brukwe of the Department of the National Development Agency. He's a senior manager, stakeholder relations. He's going to be speaking on NDA interventions towards strengthening of cooperatives. Again, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Mr. Brukwe.
Thanks, moderator. And good day to all our panelists and the participants on the platform. Aisha, can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm wondering because my video is not showing. Maybe they will assist me. Chair, I'll adapt my presentation a bit because it's kind of similar to the two previous presentations. And DSD is our motherboard, so we take a tune from there. What I will do in my presentation, I'll focus more on the role we think that partnerships can play in us achieving the ability to assist cooperatives and other CSOs, especially those that are doing income generation. Dr. Cry will be assisting me with presentation because I can't share from my side. It's failing. But whilst I'm waiting for that, I can simply say that NDA is embarking, as we speak, on a turnaround strategy. That turnaround strategy will introduce a new operating model for the entity. And that operating model will focus more on revenue generation, and those will focus on those income generation CSOs and cooperatives. And I was happy to listen to Ms. Magoga talking about linkages of cooperatives to private sector value chains, because that is what this new operating model of NDA would be focusing on going forward, because we need to have a portfolio and a pipeline of projects that will be supported by NDA in strategic collaboration or alliance with the CSI community, with other government departments like we are engaging now as we speak with Department of Small Business, your CITA, your CIFA. That presentation, that's what's happening here, is what we're discussing in terms of our strategic alliance to have more impact on the ground. So we're looking at international donors as well as part of those who can support us to grow these cooperatives and CSOs that will be involved in income generation project. Because we believe that if you are crowding in funding, the impact will be more on the ground and will be noticed by communities. So all this will be aligned to our district development model, where we are showing our value chain. Dr. Klein, are you winning on your side?
I didn't receive your presentation, Mr. Brukwe.
Oh, okay.
I was just checking my emails. Can you try to share from your side? Okay. Just press down there on the green button, share screen.
Let me start. Let me try again. Thanks, Dr. Klein.
Okay.
Yes. Is it showing?
Yes, it is.
It's showing.
Oh, yes. I'm talking about all this thing around partnerships because we have a bigger role to contribute towards the eradication of poverty and its causes. And we'll do that by granting funds to civil society organizations, including your cooperatives. So we need to act as key conduit for funding from governments, from foreign governments, and all your international donors, including your corporate social investment in the country. So the bigger scale in what we need to do in terms of our stakeholder relations goal is to have a full-scale stakeholder engagement strategy that seeks to position NDA as this responsible and proudly entity of our country with the mandate to eradicate poverty and its causes, numerous social development tentacles and interests, and other social ills. We need to be this agency that understands and considers stakeholder interests to ensure our long-term sustainability. I'm gonna skip a few slides, colleagues, and talk about our partnership model at district development level, considering the time. We're saying here is NDA, this is the model we're gonna focus on when we get to the district development model in terms of our partnership focus and strategy, is that we're gonna ensure at A there in your left-hand corner, we are looking at community profile and community public participation. So there we're saying that we're gonna be looking at existing catalytic projects in communities. We're gonna look at socioeconomic profiles of our communities. We're going to look at CSOs that are operating in that space and the CSI spent by a private sector in those particular areas. So at B there on the right-hand corner, we're saying, what are we bringing when we come to that district development model? We're saying that we have experience in community development programs. We have been implementing some through our CSOs, and we've been managing and doing a monitoring and evaluation around those issues. So we say we have income generation projects that are run by our CSOs and cooperatives. We are having development officers and development managers on the ground, and we understand the district development space very well. So at C there on the left-hand corner there below, we say that the reason why we need a strategic partnership network is that if we work with CSOs, we will have more leverage and mileage, and then we say we're looking at corporates, we're looking at provincial development agencies and SOEs that are having operation in those districts. We're looking at industrial development zone and special economic zones. We're looking at district development agencies. We're looking at municipal development agencies and your local economic development departments within local municipalities. We're looking at development finance institutions that are investing in those communities. We're looking at Sandral because Sandral is key, especially with their program of community development and the freeways and then your boreholing. And then we're looking at transport because we need to ensure that there's transport networks. So those are the stakeholders are looking at, and your research institution in your cities. So we are suggesting that going forward, if you look at our D, so these are the intervention strategies we're going to embark on with our stakeholders. Say first, we're going to look at key selling points, which are sector-based per district or local municipality for geographical footprint of NDA interventions. Then we say we're going to look at seed funding to projects, which we're going to give and then ask other partners to crowd in for more impact. So we say we're going to look at linkages with other developmental partners. Then we're saying we're going to look at one plans per district, and then we link to those plans. Then we're going to use the district development information management system to do all that. And we are currently busy now with a lot of stakeholders, including international stakeholders and your UN agencies, including your UNDP, your World Food Programs, to come and work with us so that we can have more funding crowded to assist in this model and then to have more impact on the ground. And we are approaching even our sister agencies like your CETA, your CIFA, to work with us so that we can crowd this funding so that we can have more impact on the ground. So, Chair, let me pause here. We'll address some of the questions that will arise during a question and answer session. Thank you, Chairperson. Let me pause here.
Thank you, Mr. Brooke. You have helped us a lot in recovering time. The next presentation is going to come from the research team at Red Flank. I don't have the actual name of the speaker, but I don't know who's the speaker. Or once I get an indication, I think that I hope everybody like who wants to comment or ask questions is taking notes, because the presentations are coming fast back to back. And so I think that we will just take note, and soon we will be going to a conversation. Now at Red Flank, the Red Flank team, we're handing over to you, and the speaker is going to introduce themselves. Yeah, let me just hand over to the research team at Red Flank.
Thank you so much, Chair. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Perfect. So thanks so much. Just some introductions from our side. My name is Jessica Pallett, and I'm joined by Karina Sanasi, and we are part of the Red Flank team. We'll be running through the presentation and the research findings from the research that we did on behalf of the NDA. Karina, if I can ask that you bring up the slides. Thank you so much. So as mentioned, Red Flank was appointed by the NDA to conduct research in order to understand, what is the role and contribution that cooperatives can potentially play in making or in assisting with the South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And what we'll present here today is we'll just run through some of the key findings and the recommendations that stemmed from this research that we did on behalf of the NDA. So we'll just touch on the overall objectives, we'll touch on the key findings, and we'll touch on some of the recommendations. In terms of the objectives of the project, just to kind of recap it at a high level, what essentially we wanted to do was we wanted to unpack, what role can cooperatives play in the implementation of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And that included looking at specific things, as you can see on the slide here. So it was understanding, the role and contribution that they can potentially make in order to help with the economic recovery and reform during and post the COVID-19 period. to understand, what are the potential challenges or the impediments that are faced by cooperatives that are preventing them from competing in the economy at a legislative, a policy, and a strategic level during the COVID-19 pandemic. So what were the issues that were impacting them? What were the main challenges? To understand how the COVID-19 pandemic and to understand how these challenges impacted the operations of the cooperatives, impacted the livelihoods, impacted their existence. Then to go on to understand, what are the potential mechanisms that may help cooperatives and may strengthen their role and will kind of push them towards becoming some of the main drivers of the economic recovery and reconstruction plan. And understanding as part of that, what is the role that government and private sector can play in order to support the cooperatives, play this role. Then we also wanted to, document and share the lessons learned by cooperatives in terms of how have they responded to the government, to the COVID-19 pandemic rather, what sort of support have they received, how has that assisted them, etc. And ultimately to provide some recommendations that can then be taken forward by the relevant departments that will help these organizations, help cooperatives to fulfill the envisioned role and to play a role in the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. So what we'll unpack in the key findings is, we wanted to look at a variety of things. We'll first unpack, what sort of role, how did cooperatives contribute during the COVID-19 period? Were they able to contribute to the economy? What was potentially preventing them from doing so? What were the main challenges they experienced during COVID? How did COVID impact them? As well as, then to unpack, what sort of support is required in order to help these cooperatives play a role as part of, the economic reconstruction and as we recover, sort of start to move out of COVID. So this slide illustrates, to what extent they were able to contribute to the economy during COVID-19. So as we can see, the majority of respondents here, it's about 53% or so, indicated that I think it's 56% rather, indicated that they weren't able to contribute to the economy or they were able to contribute to a very minimal extent during COVID-19. And, we'll unpack that a little bit more as we look at the impact that COVID-19 had on cooperatives. But here you'll see quite a strong theme that came out in terms of challenges, which was cited by cooperatives, is that they had issues with the restrictions on movement. The lockdown really had quite a big impact on them in terms of their ability to sell their product or give their service, as well as the ability to reach customers, to have customers traveling to them. They also cited that there was a lack of shared internal vision, which impacts their ability to operate, and that access to markets was a challenge for some of the cooperatives. And what we noted here was that in order for them to be able to contribute to the economic recovery and reform, they highlighted that, they would be able to do much more if they got grants from government. And so we noted that, government support there and private sector support is something that will play a key role there. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later. If we go into the next slide, Karina. So here we unpack more specifically the impact of COVID-19 on different areas in the cooperatives. So this looks at, how were they impacted by the national lockdown restrictions, or to what extent rather were they impacted by the national lockdown restrictions in general, and how did that impact their ability to contribute towards the economy? And we can see across both graphs, the majority of respondents agreed that they were significantly to extensively impacted by these national lockdown restrictions. And as I mentioned, that comes out, the lack of movement was quite a big issue that hampered these cooperatives, it hampered their ability to operate. And so they weren't able to contribute because of the impact on their operations. They weren't then able to contribute to the economy. So they cited things like difficulties in supplying products to their customers. They weren't able to get their products, and they also lost various customers, which ultimately, led to a decrease in profits, and it led to their ability to operate and their ability to contribute to the economy. We go on to the next slide, Karina. This looks at more specifically, how did it impact their operational status and how did it impact their revenue? So we can see in terms of the operational status, A fair amount were still able to operate, but their impact wasn't, significant. So we had 78% that were operational. We had 22% of respondents that indicated that they weren't operational. And from there, we wanted to unpack when did they stop being operational, to understand to what extent was it kind of the COVID-19 pandemic that impacted that. And we can see 32% indicated that they'd stopped operating before March, while 21% indicated that it was between March 2020 and July 2021, which is around the period when we did the study, that they'd stopped operating. We can also see there was quite a significant impact on revenue, with 73% of respondents indicating that that revenue did decrease. Only 8% cited an increase in revenue. And we can see that, the majority of respondents indicated that their revenue was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. They agreed, to a significant to an extensive extent, their revenue was impacted. Go to the next slide. So we looked at, we further unpacked the impact on operations, and we looked at, to the extent to which cooperatives agreed, as well as the extent we got input from representatives from NDA. And we wanted to understand, to what extent do they believe the COVID-19 had affected the operations of cooperatives. And we can see here across both different stakeholder types, the majority of stakeholders indicated that they were impacted between a significant to extensive extent. And again, the kind of key findings that came out here was that people had to close their workplaces, their operations paused. They had to halt their operations because there was a lack of demand. They weren't able to travel to their customers. They had a decrease in customers coming to them because the customers were afraid to travel to them. And they also encountered issues like a loss of key members, due to the pandemic, members not being able to travel to them, which impacted their skills, etc. Something important to note here is we did note as well that there were certain challenges that cooperatives cited where they noted that these were challenges even sort of before the COVID-19 pandemic, and these had just been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and sort of become worse because of the situation that they were in. We can see, however, that about 21% or so of cooperatives indicated that they weren't, the COVID-19 pandemic didn't affect their operations, or it only affected it to a minimal extent. And what we found here, quite a strong positive practice that came out, was that they'd indicated that because they received financial assistance, they got grants from government organizations, or they got grants from private sector organizations. And so that allowed them to keep operating. It really assisted them and allowed them to ensure that their business was able to continue. We'll go on to the next slide. We also looked at, in the next two slides, we'll cover this. So the impact of COVID on the quality of services, were they still able to provide services to the same quality that they were able to before the COVID-19 pandemic? And then in the next slide, we looked at whether it impacted the management of their business. And again, we can see here quite a strong impact, the majority of respondents here. So 22% indicated they were significantly impacted, 14% said that it had a substantial impact, and 35% said it had an extensive impact, on the quality of the services. And a big barrier here that stakeholders noted was that, again, due to the restrictions on movement, employees and their personnel weren't actually able to get to the cooperative. They weren't able to travel to work. And it meant that there were certain, stakeholders that weren't able to come in and perform their functions. Those had to be performed by other stakeholders. And it meant that there was a shortage of skilled personnel. And so the quality of their services dropped. We'll go on to the next slide, Karina. As I mentioned, then the last thing we looked at in terms of the impact of COVID was whether they were able to, how did it impact their ability to manage their business? And we noted here again that the majority of respondents indicated that it had a significant to extensive impact on the ability to manage their business. And what we found was, coming back again to the restrictions on movement. They couldn't move around, people couldn't get into work. It made it very hard to manage. We also noted, and this will come out a little bit later in the presentation, but only a certain amount of cooperatives were able to adapt, were able to adopt virtual working, remote working. And so it meant those who weren't able to, it did impact their ability to manage the business because they weren't able to move around. And a key finding here as well was that, people noted, and I think we all know, that COVID has been a very sort of stressful time. People have been getting sick, people have had poor health, and cooperatives noted that impacted their ability to manage their businesses. People weren't in the right headspace. They were very kind of, stressed about COVID, I'm sure stressed about the business, and it meant that it did impact their ability to manage the business. So I'll hand over to Karina from here. She will take us through, she'll just unpack some more of the challenges that cooperatives faced during COVID-19 and whether they were able to adapt. And then we'll look at, what is the key support required in order for cooperatives to be able to adapt, and then just what are some of the key recommendations stemming from the research that, could potentially be taken forward and could potentially help cooperatives play a bigger role in the economic reconstruction and recovery plan as we move, as we continue through the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you, Jess. Good morning, everyone. Is my audio clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So as Jess was saying, I'll walk through the challenges in a little bit more detail before going into the next section. So if we look at the first graph here, we can see that more than half of the respondents that participated in our study faced challenges regarding loss of income, lack of access to markets, cash flow, which would then result in them not being able to pay their employees and having to retrench them, a decrease in activities as a result and restriction of movement, which eventually decreased the probability of them selling their products to their customers, and also customers were not able to really come to them to buy their products. So what we also then did, as Jess was saying a little bit earlier, we also asked them whether they think that these challenges will continue to persist after the lockdown. So what we found is that more than half, actually 65%, believe that these challenges will continue to be here. And some of the reasons that they mentioned are because some of them were already experienced before the lockdown. So for example, the lack of funding initiatives, funding opportunities for them. This is something that they were struggling from before the pandemic, and it's something that they know they'll continue to experience even if the pandemic is over. And other reason also that they mentioned was that because they faced a loss of income during the pandemic, as we see 64% had a loss of income, they indicated that even if the restrictions of the pandemic are lifted, even if everything is back to normal, they will still not have enough financial means to be able to produce and sell their products. And then in terms of whether they were able to adapt to some of the challenges that they faced during the pandemic, here we can see that from the graph, we can see in the green bar represents the view from NDA employees, and the blue bar represent the view that we receive from cooperatives. So here we can see that only 25 or 15% of the cooperative believe that they were either extensively or substantially able to adapt to the challenges faced during the pandemic. What this means is that a lot of cooperatives also mentioned that because they were not able to adapt to the challenges in the pandemic, they had to close their business, and some of the reasons of why they couldn't adapt were because they did not have the financial means, and they were not really aware on how to apply for financial assistance that were already available in the market. But it's also good to see that both the NDA and the cooperatives that participated in the study believe that some of them were able to either minimally or significantly adapt to the challenges that they faced. And it was also very interesting to note that some of them were able to adapt the products that they were selling. So for example, some of them were able to gather an essential services certificate permit, and they were able to produce protective equipment during the COVID, and they were able to sell this to their community. And also some of them were able to gather financial resources from different sources. We'll look at the sources in a little bit more detail a little bit later in the presentation. And most importantly, some of them mentioned that they were able to use digital platforms. So for example, they were able to use WhatsApp to communicate with their members. So it's just for supporting each other, because everyone was going through a very bad time. So they were able to communicate with each other. And they were also able to use social media. Some of them mentioned that they started using social media to market their products, which is a very good step for them because they're exploring new avenues. And then, as we know, a big challenge in South Africa, not just for in the cooperative subsector, is unemployment, and unemployment rate has actually become worse because of the pandemic. So in the study, we also wanted to explore a little bit on how stakeholders believe if cooperatives could play a meaningful role in reducing this unemployment rate while the pandemic is over. We are very happy to see that 97% of the respondents strongly agreed that cooperative could play a very meaningful role to reduce unemployment. And some of the reasons behind it was because a cooperative represent a lot of small and micro enterprises, so they have this strong ability to create jobs, and it also goes back to the nature of the jobs that they create, because they need a lot of labor. So this means that they can create a lot of jobs. However, to be able to do that, cooperatives need to be financially stable so that they are able to retain and pay their employees, and that's the way they'll be able to reduce unemployment rate on the long run. And also another key finding that we found here, that cooperatives need to be able to manage their management structures a little bit more efficiently. So what we found was that there was a discrepancy in the visions that the different members were sharing, which led to different conflicts between the members, and also not all of them had the required financial and administration skills. So this can be solved by mentorship and different types of training that the NDA could actually help them to participate in. So as I was just talking about the different support, so one of the main support that we found was financial support that a lot of cooperative mentioned that they do require. As we saw a little bit earlier, a lot of them face a loss of income during the pandemic. So we asked the cooperative whether they had received government, private sector, or NDA support during the pandemic. As we can see in the pie chart here, 77% indicated that they had not received support during the pandemic. And when we asked them why they did not receive support, why do they think they did not receive support, we can see 40% mentioned unsuccessful applications. So this could be because maybe they did not comply with the requirements that were required for a successful application. They were not very sure what to really submit. And 32% mentioned that they were not aware of the support that are available in the market. So here again, it might be in rural areas where different members of the cooperative did not have enough access to information. And another key issue that we also found here was that a lot of cooperative mentioned that there are a lot of third-party costs associated with when trying to apply for support. So these third-party costs involves, for example, if they need to pay somebody to complete the application forms for them because they do not have the knowledge on how to do it, or to make sure that their financials are ready for submission. And unfortunately, not all cooperatives have the financial means to be able to spend on these third-party costs. And as we saw in the pie chart here, 77 did not receive support, but 23% did receive support. So we asked this 23% that did receive support, what was that impact of the support they received? Did they think that the support they received was enable them to provide quality services, enable them to continue operations? So here what we can see is that we have a view from government, private institutions, and NDA. So we ask cooperatives to indicate whether they receive support from these three stakeholders, and to also rate the extent to which these support that they receive allow them to provide quality services and continue operation. So what we found was that despite they did receive support, not all of the support received was as effective as intended. So if we can see in the first row of bars here, we can see in green represents the funding or the support they receive from private institutions. We can see that 56% of them mentioned that the support that they received from private institution did not actually help them at all. But at the same time, one of the reasons why the supports were not really helpful included that people did receive support, they did receive financial support, for example, but because their customers were not able to really move and come and purchase their products, they were still not able to continue their operations. And another challenge was also because cooperatives and members of the cooperative did not have the required financial knowledge, they were not really able to allocate or channel the funds that they receive to flourish their business. So the funds that they received, the support they received were mismanaged. And as a result, they were not able to continue their operations. But on the other side, on a good note here, it was very nice to see that all three stakeholders did provide support to the cooperative. So as we can see here, the government, the private institution, and the NDA, all three of them continued to provide support. And it's a very good practice that we think that should continue, especially support from the government, because as we can see on the graph here, when we ask respondents to what extent they believe that government support would enable them to contribute towards the economy, 79% strongly agreed with that statement, meaning that they do believe that they require more government support. And when we went further to ask them what type of support they require, we were happy to see, not happy, but we're pleasantly surprised to see that it's not just financial support, but they also required non-financial support in terms of training with cooperatives and creating awareness of cooperatives. So in terms of training, it also included upskilling their members so that they are able to have the required skill to produce better goods, and which will allow them to contribute to the economy. And also, they would also like non-financial support in terms of counseling, conflict resolution, so that they are able to have a better environment with their members. That was all on our key findings. In terms of the positive practices, these are the positive practices that Jess and I walked through a little bit earlier. So we have grouped the positive practices in key focus areas, and in the interest of time, I will not go through all of them. I will just highlight some key positive practice that we did find in the study. So for example, in terms of cooperatives' ability to adapt to the pandemic, we saw that some cooperatives were able to adapt by producing different types of goods. They were able to use digital platforms, and in terms of the impact of the support that they had received. So although not all of them received support, some of them that received support were able to continue to operate during the lockdown, and they were very happy with the support they received. And finally, in terms of the roles of cooperatives in reducing unemployment after the pandemic, stakeholders agreed that the cooperative could play a meaningful role in reducing unemployment. But as we mentioned a little bit earlier, cooperatives would require relevant support to be able to do that. In the next section here, I will walk through some of the key recommendations that we are proposing that could be implemented by the NDA, by the government, and other in partnership with other stakeholders as well. So in the interest of time, I will not go through all of them. A more detailed recommendation section can be found in the report that we have submitted to the NDA. So what we did here, you'll see on the left, we have a key theme. So all the challenges, all the key findings that we found in the study, we grouped them into different key themes, and then we formulated recommendations proposed to be able to solve these issues that we found. So firstly here, with regards to a lack of organizational structure, shared vision, and access to information. So here we recommend that the NDA places an emphasis on addressing issues that were already here prior to the pandemic. So for example, increasing conflict resolution training or career guidance counseling with partnership with CEDA, for example, could be organized so that cooperatives have a better environment to work with, have a better no conflict with their members. And then in terms of inability to afford material, so this is an issue that we found with not all cooperative in all subsectors, but it was in specific sectors that this was happening. So what can be done here is that the NDA could identify sectors that are most affected by the pandemic, and then we could facilitate the provision of support in terms of, for example, deferral of tax, maybe different types of grants to specifically these subsectors. And if in case production cost is becoming a little bit too much for certain types of cooperatives, it might be also good to try to help these cooperatives to link them to suppliers who are geographically closer so that they'll reduce their costs as well. The next key theme includes the lack of sustainability in the support provided to cooperatives. So there are support provided to cooperatives, but what some cooperatives mention is that there's no follow-up and there's no sustainability in the support provided. So they were mentioning that they get support once, but they don't really know what happens afterward. There's no follow-up really from the NDA. So what can be done here is that maybe the NDA could ask for feedback on the support provided to understand really, was the support provided really required, was it not required, or if it was required, what went well so that they can implement similar things for other cooperatives as well. The next key theme is about ineffective implementation of legislation and policies. So we do know that there are policies to assist cooperatives, but what we found is that some cooperatives mentioned that the legislations, the policies are here, but they don't feel that these policies are actually helping them currently. So what we think can be done is that the NDA could increase the engagement with local government officials to just understand what actually is not going well, what challenges cooperatives are having, and what are the achievable milestones, and what would be most suitable for the different types of cooperatives. The next issue is regarding the lack of funding opportunities and support from the different types of stakeholders. So here, the main thing would be, we know that funding opportunities are available, but the main issues may be mostly a lack of awareness of the funding opportunities. So here, what we propose is that the cooperatives of various should be informed of various forms of support that are available to their business. So this can be done by sharing pamphlets or leaflets in areas where people don't really have access to the digital platforms, or we could also send SMSs and group messages on WhatsApp, for example, which are easy and very common platforms where everybody has access to. In terms of lack of monitoring of the support is allocated, so here the NDA could introduce monitoring processes to make sure that they understand the impact of the support that has been provided. And next, we have the challenges impacting cooperatives' ability to create jobs. So here, once again, it's about making them aware of the types of funding available, because they mentioned that a key thing that's not enabling them to create job is funding and income. So if they are aware of the types of funding available, they'll be able to appoint more people. The next area is access to markets, which also goes back to restriction of movement. So here we believe that the NDA could work with other training institutions such as CETAs to equip cooperative with remote working skills and adequate digital tools. So we know that now we're not in a hard lockdown anymore. People are able to move around and conduct business a little bit in a more normal way. But should a similar situation happen, it's good if cooperatives are able to then work remotely, so that they know they'll still be able to market their product virtually or able to contact the different members of cooperatives virtually. In terms of lack of skills, so again, here the NDA could collaborate with different training institutions. The CETAs would be the main training institutions here to understand how cooperatives can gain more business and financial management training, because what we found is that a lot of them do have the on-hand skills that are required to, for example, to manufacture their products, but they did not really know how to manage a business, how to maintain their accounts. So they do need these kinds of training. And in terms of lack of access to internet or technology, so here access to information could be made a little bit easier in rural areas. So for example, if information really needs to be provided to them, it can be done in terms of pamphlets if they really do not have access to infrastructure, and or we could, as I mentioned earlier, we could use platforms such as WhatsApp or SMSs to convey key information. Another thing could be the NDA could, in collaboration with other stakeholders, could partner with internet service providers so that they could negotiate on better rates or different types of products that could be made available to cooperatives in rural areas. And lastly, in terms of the barriers to cooperative expansion and development, so here what we think can be done is hosting seminars to discuss the critical success factors of business and entrepreneurship. So for example, in a seminar, a successful cooperative can come and discuss, can share their success stories, how, for example, how they were able to adapt to the pandemic, so that other cooperatives also can learn from the steps that the successful cooperative took, and they are also able to be successful eventually. So thank you. That was all from our side. I'll hand over back to you, Chair.
Karina, and ahead of time now, I've got an indication. Let me check. I've got an indication that Mr. Kuvadia is actually already in session. He had indicated he might be late. Yes, he's actually in session. What I will do, okay, let me just go to what was on the chart. There was a question on the chart about the availability of the presentations and how will they be shared. The response from Dr. Cry is that all the presentations will be posted on the NDA landing page this afternoon, later this afternoon. The NDA landing site is www.nda.org.za. So that's where the presentations will be available. Now, our next presenter, as I have already indicated, is Mr. Kuvadia. from the business unit South Africa, BUSA. He is going to be presenting on the role of business in supporting cooperatives. Mr. Kuvadia.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. Let me start by just saying that given, firstly, cooperatives, I think, globally are very.
I'm handing over to you.
Oh, okay. Can I start?
Yes, you can start.
Okay. 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 So thank you very much for the invitation. And let me start by just recognizing that cooperatives in many countries are critical structures for delivery of services, delivery of goods, and for the empowerment of communities that would otherwise be excluded from economic and other activity. In South Africa in particular, I think that given the geography of our country, given that many people are still in rural areas, many people are not actively involved and have entry into the formal economy. Given our unemployment situation and the fact that we're not yet tackling the issues related to poverty and inequality, cooperatives can play a critical role in enabling people who would otherwise be excluded to be included in economic activity and other forms of activity. I think that cooperatives can also play a critical role in creating jobs and enabling communities to be in contact with business per se. And I think cooperatives can play a critical role in enabling businesses and business organizations like BUSA to actually understand what the needs of communities are, to understand how communities are organizing themselves to actually meet some of those needs. And on the back of such understanding, to actually engage to see how organizations like BUSA and some of its members can actually work with cooperatives to bolster their capacity, to ensure that they are appropriately trained, and to channel goods and services through cooperatives into communities that otherwise would not have access to those. So I think that, and I came in at the tail end of the NDA presentation, but it seems to be quite clear that the NDA is doing a fair amount of work on this and is looking at issues related to training and capacity and so on. And I think it would be useful for the NDA and BUSA to perhaps talk to each other and see if we can coordinate our activities and coordinate possible assistance and backing up of cooperatives. I think one of the things that businesses would be looking at in assisting cooperatives, be it through capacity, be it through training, be it through financing, would be to look at governance issues related to cooperatives. And I think that certainly when I was at the Banking Association of South Africa, we tried to do a fair amount of work on financial sector cooperatives and the Cooperative Banking Act and the Cooperative Development, Financial Sector Cooperative Development Agency that was set up at SAL. And what we found was that a number of financial sector cooperatives just could not meet the criteria to become cooperative banks. And that's because governance was not very high up on the agenda. There wasn't appropriate capacity, and there wasn't an appropriate sort of regulatory regime to not throttle financial sector cooperatives, but to ensure that they are appropriately governed. And I think in looking at a relationship between the business sector and cooperatives, I think we do need to have a discussion on what the most appropriate regulatory regime is for cooperatives. And it might be different for different types of cooperatives. So for financial sector cooperatives, would be very different to, let's say, agricultural cooperatives or general cooperatives. And I think those are discussions we need to have. I think we need to create that platform where both business and those managing cooperatives are on the same page about how best cooperatives should be governed, what the criteria are for sound minimum governance in cooperatives, because businesses will be reluctant to engage, would be reluctant to have a structured relationship with cooperatives if minimum governance criteria aren't in place. And I think that's something we need to talk about. We also then would want to talk about how we can stratify cooperatives. So if you look at BUSA's membership, we would certainly want to involve organizations like the Banking Association South Africa in supporting financial sector cooperatives and seeing what needs to be done to enable more cooperative banks. We would want to get our agricultural members involved in interacting with and structuring a relationship with agricultural cooperatives that are working with communities to bring about sustainable agriculture in particular areas. And there could be other areas. So I think that it would be useful to have a stratification of cooperatives so that we can identify relevant and appropriate business organizations, but also the members of those business organizations, and for want of a better term, try to twin them with specific cooperatives on the basis of what areas of activity those cooperatives are involved in. I also think that it would be useful, instead of sort of those representing the cooperative movement interacting with government on an appropriate regulatory environment, it would be useful if business and those organizations got together and first agreed on the type of regulatory environment and actually lobbied government together on that, so that we are both happy with the regulatory environment, we are both happy with governance issues, and that would then pave the way for some sort of a structured relationship between BUSA and such representative of cooperatives, and it certainly gives BUSA the confidence to ensure structured relationship between some of its members and particular cooperatives. So I think that it seems to be actually counterintuitive that we don't have a stronger cooperative movement in this country, given the challenges we have in this country. And I think that one couple of those reasons are some of the stuff I've talked about. The one is having a more structured relationship between the cooperative movement and business through organizations like BUSA and some of its members. Two, identifying minimum governance criteria for cooperatives and ensuring that they have the capacity to meet those governance criteria, because that then gives the business sector the confidence to actually establish structured relationship. Three, for the private sector and cooperatives to get onto the same page as far as what's the appropriate regulatory environment for cooperatives to, one, enable them to govern themselves properly, but also to grow and develop. And we can then lobby government together for such a regulatory environment. And I think if we begin to address those sorts of issues and we begin to work together on those sorts of issues, I think that the potential for a more structured relationship between the private sector and cooperative is definitely there. I think that again, and I mean, I did more work on financial sector cooperative during my banking association days than I've done in BUSA in the period that I've been at BUSA. But again, we certainly, banks saw cooperatives or financial sector cooperatives with appropriately regulated, structured, and governed as mechanisms through which banks could actually provide finance, which finance then gets to those sectors of our community and our society that are not directly serviced by formal banks. And we always argued at that time that instead of throwing bricks at each other and expecting formal banks to directly lend to everybody in the country or directly service from a banking point of view, everybody in the country, we should look at a more diversified financial structure of which cooperative banks should be an essential part. And banks then, through such cooperative banks, actually provide services to people. And it's those sorts of discussions we should be having. How can corporates work with cooperatives and through cooperatives provide goods, services, and other needs to people in a sustainable way? So let me stop there, and what I would certainly want to do is pick this up after the seminar to see if we can sit down with the NDA and whoever else you suggest to actually take some of the matters forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. Now, I think that it's clear. I'm just going to take a bit of time now because we've covered pretty well in terms of the allocated time. There's few things that I want to speak to before yeah, we are still very much on time. Look, I mean, that is worrying me a bit here. And I think it's something that it's a worry, but it's not train smash. It's something that we will actually have to resolve, given the fact that this is the first webinar we are having through the NDA. And the intention is not just to talk and have no results. In a sense, most of us who are here, one way or the other, are practitioners in areas that could help a great deal to support cooperatives. Now, the theme of the webinar is about the economic reconstruction and recovery. And in fact, of interest to me is the fact that there is a lot of the study that was done focused a lot on what happened. There are cooperatives, there's existing cooperatives in South Africa. And these existing cooperatives in South Africa are a far cry from what we actually aspire for, to as a nation. We aspire for more cooperatives, but not just as incorporated, what you call structures, cooperatives as incorporated structures, but cooperatives as successful businesses across the country, in particular in Black townships and rural areas, also as a means of increasing participation in the economy by historically disadvantaged. Now, you see the ERRP, and the reason why I'm actually speaking now is because I'm unhappy about the foregrounding, because you see, for instance, the study is focusing on what the impact of COVID was on cooperatives, the existing ones. and like it then recommends what should be done in the future. And I can think specifically that given the fact that we are talking about economic reconstruction and recovery plan, there is an immediate connection that should, or link that should have been made, because the economic reconstruction and recovery plan exists and is a negotiated what you call plan of the country by social partners at NETLEC. And that plan provides real opportunities, and these opportunities are across the sectors. There's a particular program that I'm thinking about, I mean, which is industrialization through localization, with a lot of multi-sectoral opportunities. It could be in agriculture, it could be in manufacturing, it could be in retail, it could be in various other spaces that localization opportunities exist on. And now, when you think about that, there are specific targets in ARRP, and the reason I'm bringing this home is because there's a 20% target in the industrialization through localization, a 20% localization target, which is a replacement of imports at 20%, and these in figures, in financial term figures, using 2019 data, amounts to 1.1 trillion rands. Like the imports over a 5-year period amount to 1.1 trillion rand. And basically substituting them at 20% equals 220 billion rands. And some of these things are things that could basically give us a target. It's things that we could be working towards. But there's a second point I want to speak to. On the recommendations, there's things like training and skills development and capacity building. And in ERRP, in the skill strategy for ERRP, there is a specific expression on community colleges, TVET colleges, but in particular on community colleges, there's an intention of creating a number of community colleges, at least one community college per district, and we have got 52 districts in the country. Now, if we were to create these 52 community colleges, one of the things that basically is said that it must be mandatory for all of the community colleges is to provide skills in entrepreneurship. There's also, like in law, in terms of the Cooperatives Act, there is a Cooperatives Academy that is actually legislated. In the current skill strategy for ERRP, there is a mention of the Cooperative Academy being partnered with community colleges, so that the training in community colleges also provide skills for startups, for SMMEs, for informal traders, but also specifically for cooperatives. So I'm saying that, you see, my gripe with us is that there's already the theme that we are having this webinar on is a correct theme, is on ERRP. But we are also not bringing the ERRP in immediately, so that it provides the opportunities that are already in existence. And they are not only in localization, it's across all the 8 areas of the ERRP. So what I'm saying is that we may then need to be looking at opportunities that exist, and then facilitate participation by not only the cooperatives that are already in existence, but also the cooperatives that actually intend to register and so on and so forth, and make it easy. And I think the issue of regulation is quite key. Make it easy for cooperatives to incorporate funding and to get capacity building and all the ingredients that will make them successful. So I'm saying these things because the speakers are going, and when we're having discussions, let's bring it back home and say, of course, we have got cooperatives, but we have got an intention as a country to recover our economy, and we have to basically also deal with this 47% unemployment rate and the high levels of youth, women, and people with disability unemployment, which are also, everybody is showing that they are prioritizing these, but in fact, we are having the worst outcomes in those areas. So I was just taking the time because it has become available. We're happy with the presentations. They've shown us, in fact, the type of services that are actually available in the country. and the services are actually adequate in terms of their, like how they are organized. But there's a question on whether they are getting to the intended beneficiaries, and whether the information is easily accessible, like for a person in a village or in a township, to know where to go when they just want to begin. So some of these questions are stuff that I want us to also think about when we are getting into question and answers as well as discussion. Now, I'm going to continue. We have got 2 more speakers before we get into the discussion. The next speaker in our agenda is Ms. Lee Hildyard, a Program Policy Officer, Resilience, Smallholder Market Access and Food Systems at the United Nations World Food Program. Ms. Lee Hildyard is going to be speaking on supporting smallholders information. Over to you, Ms. Hildyard.
Thank you so much, Chair and participants, and very happy to join you this morning. Could you just let me know if you can hear me okay?
Yes,
we can hear you very well.
Thank you so much. And today we wanted to be able to speak to you on the work that WFP does in the region, supporting governments around smallholder farmers and cooperatives, particularly linked to the food system transformation. So just to give you a very quick view of what that is, it's really just an overview in terms of what some of the food system inefficiencies are and their effect on smallholders and cooperatives, and then looking at the 4 impact pathways that many of our country offices follow in this region. So first of all, I think, to really establish in terms of why are food systems inefficiencies important in this discussion. So what we know is that, food systems have really come to the foreground with the impact of COVID and now the Ukraine crisis. And we're really seeing how the inefficiencies in those systems are leading to high levels of food insecurity in this region, but also affect rural development, women's empowerment, youth employment, etc. All of the areas which the other panelists have mentioned before. And some of those issues that we do see and how they impact in terms of on smallholder farmers. And in this presentation, we'll focus particularly on the work that we do with cooperatives linked to agriculture, but they really affect the entire spectrum of issues. So the issues around the food system in terms of market accessibility, in terms of the way that consumption patterns and demands from consumers actually drive production decision making, the limited diversification that we see as a result of these very narrow consumption type of patterns, the distribution challenges that we see in terms of the roads and transportation network, as well as a very, very high losses in this region at a post-harvest area, and as well as at household level. So these are some of the areas around the food system that WFP looks at, and I would say that these are not, this is not in its entirety. There are a lot of other issues, but these are some of the big ones that we do see, where we try to establish ourselves to really address the areas from production all the way to consumption, including areas within specific value chains. So looking at the food system as a framework and then particular value chains within that. So in terms of our work that we do around supporting smallholder farmers, that approach is taken largely at an aggregate level through 4 kind of impact pathways. So the first one being to create stable demand from buyers, which really has a look at how we can work with quality-orientated buyers, institutional buyers, and private companies to encourage their purchase from smallholder farmers and really improve livelihoods as well as local economic impact at a local food system level. The second one being in terms of inclusive aggregation systems, and this looks at the aggregators, in this case, cooperatives or farmers organizations, and how we can empower them to work together to build collective businesses and increase their bargaining power and access to markets that already exist. The third area is looking at the individual at the household level. And there are a lot of areas that we focus on there, which really address some of those food system constraints that I mentioned earlier. That includes high levels of post-harvest loss, production yields and how to increase that, as well as the impact that may have long-term on the environment, and really looking at how we can use that entry point to improve gender equality and strengthen household nutrition overall. And then the fourth one is having a look at the enabling environment. And I'll give you some examples of the work that we do around that, but that's looking in terms of how do we invest in the market systems for smallholder farmers, and how do we link that to government programs, some of them which have been mentioned this morning already, but how do we really create a vibrant and inclusive agricultural trade in rural areas in particular. So in the first one, in terms of some examples of how we work around creating stable demand, we support smallholder farmers and cooperatives to link to institutional feeding. One of those examples is the example of homegrown school feeding, which is active in many countries in the region. And I know that there are examples of that in South Africa today. One of the countries that I really wanted to highlight here was Malawi, in terms of how they've approached linking their cooperatives, which is identified through the Ministry of Agriculture at both national and district levels, to schools to provide locally produced and highly diversified food in order to support education outcomes and ultimately the kind of human capital investments that the government is looking at. So essentially the farmers' organizations are linked directly to the schools, and there are a couple of different models in terms of how that happens, either through a centralized system or decentralized, as I mentioned before, and they provide those schools with commodities year-round, following a competitive process. And so there are a variety of different approaches that have been developed to ensure that procurement is smallholder friendly and cooperative friendly. So addressing some of the things in terms of the way that contracts are designed, the way that they are shared within the community, and how they are supported in order to deliver that. So the idea really being that you need to have both an aggregated supply in order to provide food year on, every day for a year to schools, but you also need to look at how you aggregate the demand of that, so that farmers are able to plan against what the needs are. And that what we really see is that when they are able to plan against a kind of stable demand, they are then able to make more investments in their production, and also they are able to look at investing in other areas, including around agro-processing, small businesses. And I think, one of the key areas here is in education, further education for themselves and their children. And we particularly see how this plays out for women's empowerment and youth employment in the long run. So this is often coupled in WFP with activities that are integrated around our livelihood interventions. And that can include areas that really link into building the infrastructure around schools and around cooperatives in terms of storage, in terms of road access, road network access, which we see a key issue in the food system around distribution challenges. And so Malawi really is a great example in terms of how they have an integrated approach to school feeding and working with cooperatives. Another example, just in terms of here, is looking at how we work within the food system to create the stable demand, and really looking at the kind of value addition across the value chain. So in Madagascar, for example, we've really worked with them in identifying commodities that are both climate smart, but are also largely controlled by women to process that. And in this case, it's in the form of gari, which is a byproduct and of cassava, into something that can be then sold into schools, packaged within the community. It also has a much longer shelf life, which obviously then has impact in terms of household food security, but also long-term business opportunity for women and for communities in that area, selling through the schools, but also selling into the markets. One that I had mentioned to you was around how do we create inclusive aggregation systems. And I think this is key for the discussion today, is really looking at how we can support cooperatives, governments and business management. And WFP supports cooperatives in a variety of different ways. As I said, sometimes that looks at building the infrastructure that they require in order to actively integrate into the market, but it also includes areas where we support them in terms of their basic business management, setting up, providing capacity building to cooperative management, in terms of warehouse management, in terms of business planning, demand planning, etc. And in Zambia, for example, we've established aggregation systems that link smallholder farmers to warehouse receipt systems and support the development of improved market infrastructure and storage at community level. And what that does is also address some of the areas linked to financial inputs that are often a challenge for cooperatives. So on a warehouse receipt system, there is a core area linked to the fact that that commodity already exists. Financial institutions are then willing to loan against that commodity, which is known to be at a certain quality and quantity. And these are kind of important aspects that are taken in terms of how we can support those inclusive aggregation systems. At the household level, and I think when we talk about cooperatives, we really are talking about a collective household at some level, and really how do we support the households to then be active members of those cooperatives, because that is really key. And what we've seen in the region is that if we don't have active membership, we don't have cooperatives that are really functional and are able to access the market in the long term. So in terms of supporting production, as one of the areas that we focus on at a household level, is how do we support smallholder farmers individually to increase the yields that they may have through the promotion of conservation agriculture and looking at options around the variety of crops that might be available, both indigenous varieties as well as drought tolerant varieties, and looking at helping them expand their production, but also diversify that production so that their risk is minimized in situations where we may have climate impact, etc. So in Zambia, we do that through, and in other countries, Zambia is only one example, by facilitating access to financial services, encouraging the development of microfinancing and village savings and loan, as well as providing weather index insurance through some of these programs which support farmers in the event of a climate shock, particularly around drought, and in some cases in this region that is also linked to flooding issues. And the other point that I wanted to mention at household level, and one that I think is exceptionally important, is this area around loss. Because if we're creating a market access, we need to have a certain level of quantity and quality, and we do see exceptionally high levels of loss in this region. So one of the areas, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of photos on the slide here, is how WFP links farmers to Hematic storage equipment. And these are low tech, but very high impact storage things around pick bags. In particular, they cost very little in terms of their long-term shelf life. They last about 3 years for a 50 kg bag, and farmers are then able to see a much higher yield over time. They also are then able to access the market at a time that makes most sense for them. And so what we have seen is that without this type of storage option, we see smallholder farmers and agricultural communities selling their commodities very early in the season. They then receive a very low price for that. And that obviously has a run-on effect in terms of the decisions that they may make later on for the next season, as well as their own household food security. So one of the ways is to provide them with this hermetic storage facilities, and that increases from the pick bags, which you can see in that picture at the top, as well as small storage facilities and grain silos. The second one I wanted to mention was a very interesting approach in terms of how do we assist across the value chain and at a processing level. So the cold chain being a particular issue within distribution. And on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you will see an example from Malawi again, where they have the Fennec cooler box, which is a really innovative and simple measure to improve small-scale cold chains at rural level, and the opportunity to increase the shelf life of fresh products, which we know also at a market level has a higher return on investment for smallholder farmers and for communities, if they are able to process that or increase the shelf life so that they can get it to market. And this is one of the ways that it works in terms of cooling technology, where water is put in the sides of these boxes, and then it's cooled over a period of time, and it extends the shelf life from a few days to maybe a week or more, which isn't more than enough time for the communities to then access and bring that to market. It also obviously reduces the impact of pests on that system. And then moving to the last point in terms of how do we support and how can we support conducive environments. And I think this was mentioned in the report findings from the earlier presenters. There are a couple of applications that WFP uses. I'm going to just show you two of them. And these are really options that link smallholder farmers to the marketplace at a digital level. What this does is that it then overrides some of the issues that we see in terms of distribution, in terms of the access to information that we see at a rural level that's often really impacted in terms of where communities are based, if they are impacted by road networks, etc., as well as the impact of support around capacity building. And so you'll see an example of this is the Farm to Go Android mobile app, which works for aggregators. That's an impression in terms of the interface that you would see if you were part of that app. It also works offline, and it allows farmers to place their commodities online into a system to say, I have X amount of commodity for sale at this quality level, and this is the accepted type of pricing. It can differ slightly, and then the traders are also able to see what is on offer, where is it located, and we're able to track in terms of how those farmers are selling commodities through these systems. We're also able to track in terms of how the support that we've given is having an impact long term in terms of sales to the market, but it also helps to connect farmers to markets that may not be in their direct geographical location, which is one of the issues that we certainly saw with COVID, was how did farmers actually access that market when movement was restricted. And we have worked in South Africa with cooperatives in terms of digital and financial literacy to enable them to enact with systems like this and really increase the opportunities that they have at both a local and a global level for selling their stock. So this is just a very quick example of how that platform works. So you'll see that the aggregators and farmers can register their commodities, and then the aggregator would collect the farmer's commodities directly. In this case, it would be a cooperative. And then the trader sends an offer to buy those commodities to the farmer organization. So that happens all downstream, and then upstream that exchange and payment is made. And WFP can track all of those interactions within the system to allow us to make certain operational decision making in terms of where we can make more investment or what type of capacity development may be needed and supported through these farmers organizations. Another example I wanted to just share with you is on the Mano Virtual Farmers Act, which is active now in Malawi. And I hope that you can see my slide. I'm not sure if the Zoom is covering the top part, but essentially having a look at some of the issues that farmers have around access to markets. And those are price instability, low transparency, supply inconsistency. These are all issues that the market faces in actually working with small-scale cooperatives. And some of those solutions include the digitalized trading platform. So how do we create a favorable business environment for off-takers and a track record of those aggregators over time so the market has trust in those suppliers and will continue to purchase from them? What we often see is that because cooperatives and smallholder farmer organizations don't have a track record of selling into the formal market, it becomes very difficult for them to entice buyers in from outside, and then they will often receive very low prices from the buyers that may exist and are buying at a farm gate level. So the idea is to link the convenience to market linkages, as well as creating a security in terms of the transaction and the transparency of that. And obviously all of that information is kept confidential. So in terms of the Mano farmers market, for the farmers, it obviously offers them a super easy access to premium markets that could be locally as well as internationally. And we've seen smallholder farmers in Zambia selling into international markets. It also reduces the transactional cost for both the farmer and the buyer. So the buyer doesn't have to go to the village or to the rural areas to look for that supply. He already knows that there is a certain level of quality and quantity available from that farmer, and it's all done online, and they can make a decision at that thing. And the market information and price discovery is also linked for the smallholder farmer so that they know what prices exist. We've often seen that this is a serious challenge for cooperatives to engage in formal markets, is understanding market information and the price discovery mechanisms that happen, but also allowing them to make decisions in terms of when they sell to who in order to receive better prices and higher incomes. And of course, it's around looking at the transparency of those transactions. And in fact, this app has recently just won the 2020 Financial Literacy Awards in Zambia for this particular approach. So thank you so much, colleagues. I will leave it there, I believe. And this is just the last picture in terms of storage and infrastructure support that WFP has supported there. You will see an example of some of those bags that I mentioned, as well as the infrastructure around cooperatives in the agricultural space in terms of improving the quality that they can offer their members, as well as how that quality is then translated up into the market. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lee. We now gonna have the last presentation. Then we're gonna take questions and answers and sneak in some discussion there. Now, the last speaker speaks on the limitations for cooperative sector in South Africa, and the speaker is Mr. Lawrence Munyahi, the Deputy Secretary General of the SANACO, South African National Apex Cooperative. Over to you, Mr. Munyahi.
Please stop sharing. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Ndlovu, for the opportunity. And thanks so much to the overall convener of the committee constituency, Mr. Thulani Chefuta, for the opportunity to make a presentation. But of course, representing SANACO, but under the auspices of the NEDLEC committee constituency. I think one would like to appreciate the role perhaps of the or the attitude of the Ministry of Small Business Development under the leadership of the Minister Stelanda Beni Abrams, who I think has in many ways created an environment for cooperatives to thrive and be able to provide the necessary platform and support to cooperatives. I think I'm trying to move this slide forward. Can everyone see the slide?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. I think what we are saying, therefore, is that the majority of communities in South Africa face hardships and the triple challenge of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And the government has identified cooperatives as an agent of social economic development. And through the NDP 2030 vision, as well as South Africa being the signatory of the Sustainable Development Goals, to ensure that South Africa plays a significant role in ensuring that we are able to contribute into those sustainable development goals. But also noting that government generally, and which is the plan that we've been working on at NEDLEC as different constituencies, is the issue around the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, and as a direct response to a post-COVID-19 crisis, as well as the war in Russia and Ukraine, which actually compounds the economic hardships that we have in the country. And this presentation broadly identifies the limitations as well as the limitations within the cooperative sector in South Africa, but also try and identify some solutions to the challenges that we experience. And this is going to be grounded on the Cooperatives Act number 6 of 2013. And the reason why we are actually looking at the Act is that then the Act calls for critical institutions or entities that must be established to ensure that there's much more coordination, there's much more grounding of cooperatives. And in this instance, it talks about the Cooperatives Development Agency, the Cooperatives Tribunal, the Ministerial Advisory Council, as well as the Cooperatives Academy. And, we have noted, for instance, that during our discussions, negotiations at NEDLEC, it had actually included the Cooperatives Academy, but ultimately it was then thrown out because of the contestation between DIET as well as the Department of Small Business Development, because DIET was saying no, is their area of, should be their area of focus. But we are saying as cooperatives that that is still a critical platform for consideration because cooperatives are different from other forms of business enterprises. And I mean, if one had to look at, for instance, which we're going to reflect a little bit moving forward, if one had to look at the principles, for instance, of the cooperatives, one can safely say that, the cooperatives assumes a middle center of the business on the one hand, as well as civil society on the one hand. Hence, even within NEDLEC, we are located within the committee constituency. And obviously the department is the one that is the custodian of the Act. But you see, some of the challenges now is that, for instance, does government at this point in time have got capacity to be able to, sort of like introduce those entities, the Cooperatives Development Academy as the most critical, because when we were pushing forward ideas around the establishment of the agency, was that we wanted the government to have a much more coordinated approach to cooperatives development. Now, we have noted that the majority of registered cooperatives are in the agricultural space, but they spread also beyond even the 10 identified sectors within the Act itself. And we have made, therefore, the following observation that the environment generally is hostile towards cooperatives in South Africa, and one may relate one example of high costs of energy in the country. Even prior COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, if you look at the cost of kilowatt electricity, for instance, and you look at cooperatives that are running bakeries in the rural areas, they need to have a 3-phase system. They need to be able to consume quite a lot of energy for them to be able to run their enterprises. And what we have seen broadly is that that has actually run down some of the operations of these cooperatives. It goes to also irrigation, running the pumps in the farms and so on. So those are some of the challenges that perhaps one might want to look at. But the government is a major driver of job creation and enterprise development. But if you can look at it, there is a bit of reluctancy in terms of procuring the goods and services from cooperatives, and we've identified that as one area that you know, which is a bit problematic. But the other challenge is with regard to the resource mobilization broadly of cooperatives, and that this speaks to the qualified personnel required to carry out, you know, certain tasks and operations within these cooperatives, as well as the funding to sustain these cooperatives. And one, for instance, if one had to make a reference to, for example, how the Volkskas Bank, for instance, was established, even though now it's incorporated within the Amalgamated Banks of South Africa and you know, popularly known as ABSA. You will see that it had a specific mandate to ensure that it supports cooperatives as well as farmers generally, because there was quite a dedicated support for cooperatives and farmers through that type of a platform. Hence the success that was actually seen during those days in terms of the cooperative development. But the other issue that we've identified is the fragmentation within government and development finance institutions on the support of co-ops, which in turn promotes competition amongst cooperatives, and that is a contra opposite of what, you know, cooperatives should be in line with its principle of cooperation amongst cooperatives. So in essence, this fragmentation in support of cooperatives then facilitate you know, competition and so forth. And I mean, for instance, this department will be providing support, that will be providing support, it's in fragmentation, it's not well coordinated and so forth. So we have identified that as one of the key challenges that we are experiencing as the sector. But obviously the issue around the fourth industrial revolution, it's quite a serious one, because cooperatives are now left behind because of so many other challenges. I mean, you look at the cost of data, for example, which is the point that we are actually putting forward, that, you know, you'll have a very high, you know, cost data, which cooperatives cannot be able to afford. But also we are also looking at the lack of both technical and business skills amongst cooperative members, and the inability of the sector to attract graduates from you know, institutions of higher learning in the country. And that in essence creates a gap, because young people who are graduates feel that when they are working in cooperatives, they are working for, you know, I'll put that in inverted commas, low-class type of enterprises or business initiatives, and that has to be demystified so that the sector can be able to attract the necessary skills it requires for it to be able to thrive. But what we are saying, in essence, is that government must be able to fast track, and in this instance, discussions have ensued between the sector and the Department of Small Business Development, so that we then fast track the establishment of the Cooperatives Development Agency, because we see that as a critical platform, so that we can then be able to coordinate well the support and the sustainability of these cooperatives at different levels, primary, secondary, tertiary, as well as at apex level. But of course, the issue of the tribunal, cooperatives tribunal, is critical in the sense that where there are challenges, that may require external intervention, the tribunal should then be available to be able to resolve some of those challenges as and when they ensue. But also the issue around the Ministerial Advisory Council, which of course should also involve the sector itself, so that, you know, the minister can be able to be provided with the necessary advice and brief and so on from the council, as well as the academy, because, you know, cooperatives are a different enterprise and requires, in essence, a different type of orientation and education, because it's different. It's grounded on its key principles that actually put emphasis on specific areas, you know, of ensuring that, you know, members are at the center of this cooperative and so forth. But we're also saying that we should set aside some of the commodities and services that should be provided by cooperatives, and that should be a deliberate move, and government should therefore take a lead in that instance. I mean, we have seen, for example, the current crisis, you know, around, and this is the point that we've made in the next bullet, that you know, there's a crisis now of the supply of sunflower oil and sunflower seeds, generally because of the war that has ensued between Ukraine and Russia. And in our view, therefore, is that South Africa as a country, we can be able to produce sunflower. But what is it that Ukraine and Russia have done differently that they become two largest supplier of sunflower in the country? Obviously, in the globe, rather, you'll notice that it is primarily because of the efficient methods that they've used in farming, and their governments have put quite sufficient weight and support for the farmers that are producing those sunflower seeds, etc. And we got exposed, and hence we have got a rise in the price of sunflower oil in the country, which has almost doubled in the past 2 years or so. And therefore, we are also saying that how do we then cut the red tape? I think it should be a deliberate, and I think the presidency, there's an appetite from the presidency to ensure that this red tape is cut. These programs that are targeted on cooperatives should not be very difficult for cooperatives to access, because if you are going to create make available support or funding for cooperatives, but you put a lot of systems that actually becomes a barrier for cooperatives to apply, then it does not necessarily assist. Then we reduce all these, you know, interventions that are there for cooperatives into just talk shops, because we can't translate them into you know, real action and so forth. And also we are saying that you know, one of the things that we should look at is how do we ensure that sites where information on cooperatives, for example, it should be off data. So you don't necessarily need to have data to be able to access those sites, particularly sites that have got critical information that cooperatives should be able to access. And I think in this instance, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies therefore should be able to step in and say, how do we ensure that we across all data providers, how do we ensure that we then exempt some of the sites so that, you know, cooperatives can then be able to access them for free, because they will be containing critical information that is needed by cooperatives. We're also saying that on the whole process of the independent power producers, there's no way that we can leave out cooperatives outside the energy transition, just energy transition. We should be able to ensure that communities play a central role. I mean, we've got challenges now in communities where cables are stolen and so on from Eskom powered stations and also distribution lines and so forth. So we're therefore, or transmission lines, we're therefore saying that what we also need to do is to get communities as partners in this process, and then cooperative then becomes a channel for us to be able to, do that in essence. So if we're going to only leave the independent power production to, the private sector, it is not going to assist us, because we leave communities outside, and then we'll then have a contestation between communities as well as the private sector in terms of the sustainability of those IPPs. So we're also saying that broadly, we have over 800 million people globally who are members of cooperatives. So there's no doubt that cooperatives is a workable model. And we have seen, for instance, during and post the 2008 global economic crisis, that cooperatives were able to be resilient from that crisis and so forth. So in essence, we are saying that it's a way to go. And I think we have just projected also the principles of cooperatives, and deliberately, because if you can look at them, of course, they are business orientated, but at the same time, they are community orientated. So if you want to, you can't do business, and this business is not sustained, is not eco-friendly, for instance. It is not contributing to the destruction of the environment. So you then not be operating as a co-op, but something else. So the cooperative should be able to, take into cognizance or be able to follow all of those, including the cooperation amongst cooperatives, because cooperatives should be able to work together. Hence, recently the global conference, International Cooperatives Alliance, global assembly that was held in Seville in Spain, which brought together cooperatives from around the world so that they can be able to, elect their own leadership, but as well share good practices so that we can then be able to cooperate and learn from each other. We are saying that in conclusion, as a sector, we should be able to ensure that there's unity and search for excellence. And I think Busa has already, deliberated on some of these issues in their presentation. And also that we should be able to champion, cooperatives generally, and ensure that, as a sector, we continue to provide the space for research, harnessing intellectual debate, as well as encouraging learning and educational development. And I think that would be the presentation from our side. Thanks very much, OC and Mr. Love. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mr. Munyahi. We've done very well in terms of time. I mean, we've recovered to a point now that it's 1:45, and we are really on time to have the question and answer session. And I don't want to take a lot of time speaking myself. First, I think I'm giving a virtual round of applause to all the speakers for keeping to the time and enabling participants in the webinar to make the next 10. Can we then, by show of hands, see if there are people who would like to make some contributions? And I'm going to request that whoever basically is asking questions or making comments must keep it short, so that we also allow time for respondents to be able to respond adequately. I'm still not seeing any hand yet. So yeah, the floor is open now for questions and answers, and the questions and answers are for all the speakers since the morning until now. You just basically indicate which panelist is the question directed to. Can I see then by show of hands if there are any, there's anybody who wishes to raise a question or would like to make a comment. Sorry, am I might think I'm audible, whereas I'm not. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, Chair, you are audible, although we keep losing you, but we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, that's why I don't want to speak a lot because my network seems to have challenges. So if we can get the participants to engage with the speakers or the panelists, any takers. Still
I see there's Mr. Baloyi there. Let me allow him to talk. Let me unmute him with your permission.
Yes, go on.
Mr. Baloyi.
Am I audible, Dr. Krai?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Thanks very much.
Go ahead.
I was greetings to the program director, and thanks for the speakers. And I think this is one of the very intriguing presentations. When you look across all of them, they are talking about the role that the cooperatives should play in the development of our communities. And maybe it may not sound a question per se, but a comment of reflection, particularly taking from the last speaker, a program director, because the picture, the presentation of the last speaker, even the previous ones are painting is the harsh reality or inconducive environment that the cooperatives are facing, particularly from a government as an enabler, but which leads to an extended environment not very to be not friendly. When we confine that to the government of South Africa in particular, I may not be a very a friend of the current procurement regime that we are having as government, because it tends to exclude, technically excluding the cooperatives to exercise or do business with government where they should be benefiting more. The issue that we are having, the preferential procurement processes don't seem to be giving an extended hand to assist these cooperatives. And my argument or contention is that until we have this restructured, a real restructured procurement regime that will intentionally take on board these cooperatives, because the harsh reality, economic realities we are facing currently, and they don't seem to be gonna be lesser or be eased soon due to, like you pointed, international pressures. It's going to make things worse. So I think if we intentionally strengthen the role that the cooperative should play in the midst of these difficulties, will make things easier. Now, I think this will come with the political will, not just rhetoric statements that we are getting from government, whereby we're talking cooperatives as is a by the way, but bringing cooperatives at the core, because the space to be to be correct, is being occupied by competitive market strategies that we're having in terms of procurement, where the markets, competitive markets, are being put at the center, but the cooperatives are neglected. Hence, until we restructure that, until the government brings on board that strong, coherent political will to say, let the cooperatives occupy the center of production, the center of procurement, that can even drive the prices lower because the production process may be affordable. I think that may ease the pressures that we're having, because it doesn't help even to the consumers, even the people on the ground itself. We found things to be very expensive. Some things, when you look at the procurement process that we are following, you wonder whether the value chain of production, is it really necessary so that we can have something that is affordable to them. So the work of the cooperative at the end of the day is to the benefit of the community at large. This is my reflection and contribution, program director to this. Thanks very much. I am not sure how do I unmute this.
Thanks, Mr. Baloyi. Are there any other takers? Maybe also, there's Mr. Prukwe. Go on, Mr. Prukwe.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is directed to Ms. Kwatikoka from Department of Small Business. Just checking how far they have, how successful they are as a department with respect to linkages of cooperatives to private sector value chains. Looking back, maybe back in the last 2 or 3 years. Thanks, Chairperson.
There's also a hand from Hematic Funzo.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm Hematic Funzo from WFP, based in Johannesburg, and also I'm responsible for the engagements with the South African government and all the some of the entities that we work with. But my observation is, firstly and mostly as a South African, is that the government is spending a lot of money in terms of the cooperatives, but some with the lack of guidance and support, you'll find people will just come together and open a cooperative, but after some time, a year or two, after the grants are provided, it fails. I think if we could have strong systems in terms of supporting the cooperatives and learning from other places that cooperatives have worked very well, and see what ingredients have assisted in making them to work, and also to link them with government spending, like your school feeding. The cooperatives should be prioritized there. It should be aligned with the policy procurement, like the previous speaker spoke, to say minimum. If you look at the experiences of Brazil in terms of their school feeding, ensuring that schools are fed by the cooperatives and small business, small farmers. The example is also within the region that is already there, like other countries that WFP is assisting in terms of homeschool ground feeding. The other time I was discussing with the correctional services, they were saying they want to buy from small holders or small cooperative, but the problem is they are not organized, they are not having their supplies in bulk. So I think the money is there in terms of what you see, what is invested, but the impact is not seen. I think we can work very much together as WFP and other partners and other UN agencies and other local NGOs to make sure that the efficiencies are there, the impact is felt, so that we see the value of what is being put in. But currently, as it is, the potential is there, but it will only remain potential until we tap on it, because I don't see why hospitals have to be food that goes to hospitals should come from a big multi-corporation that take out the money out of the country. The money is not circulating. But if we say we assist, and then we can start use the district development model. We start in a single district. We make sure that all our efforts and resources are that, so that one district could act as a model for other districts to be expanded, rather than to want to do at a bigger scale and have numbers to say we have given grant to this much, but there's no follow-up, there's no monitoring. At the end, when you ask the cooperative that you provided grants and funding 10 years ago, where are they now? Can you track them and tell us the progress? How have they graduated? How are they standing on their 2 feet without assistance? So I think we should be gradual in the approach, and also we should be patient, and also we should link the government system. We should make sure that the coordination between different government entities and different government departments, the sort of the planning is sort of aligned and consistent, so that what one department does is also supporting the other department, not to try to reach your own targets alone. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Funzo. Let me go to chat because I saw this. I think I'm going to read with focusing on what we need to state
Chair,
note.
we can't hear you, Chair.
Chair, we are battling to hear you.
Yeah.
I think it's your connectivity.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
It sounds, yeah, you better now. Yeah.
Okay, I get problems. The day progresses in my neighborhood. So I was reading Mr. Slamlela's point on the chat, which says we seem to be focusing on form over function. What we need in South Africa is a very robust and radical economic transformation plan, and not policy. Policies are bound in South Africa. We just unveiled NISET, from whether co-op or any other type of business is irrelevant when it comes to economic transformation. That's the national agenda we need. I think it's a comment that is directed to everybody. Now, there was a question by Mr. Brooke. I couldn't get who is it directed at. If we could get the person is directed at Mr. Brooke, so that we can get them to respond.
It's Ms. Koka from Small Business Chairperson.
Okay, Ms. Koka, there is a question that was asked by Mr. Brooke to you. Can I also add a question, because I'm just taking advantage? In terms of the department and its agencies like SIDA and SIFA, we saw, in fact, that there is a system, there is an ecosystem that has been created by the department. And that ecosystem supports, like in a sense, cradle to grave services for cooperatives, which is a good thing. But the question I have is whether there's any monitoring of whether the information is getting to the targeted audience. For instance, how do we get the information to people in townships and people in villages or rural areas that are intended beneficiaries of the services that are provided by the Department of Small Business Development and its agencies? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can I respond to your question? But before I do that, can you kindly just summarize Tolile's question, Mr. Brugge's question for me?
Okay, well, because I've got the connectivity challenge, I'm just going to allow him to state the question again.
Thank you so much.
Mr.
Thank you, Ms. Kaka. I was just checking, how successful are you as a department with respect to linking cooperatives to the private sector value chains? Thanks, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I'll start by answering the ecosystem question that or comment that was made by the chair. Yes, CEDA, DSBD, together with its agency, used to run road shows all over the country. But with COVID, things changed a bit. But what happens is that there are pre-formation seminars that are conducted within CEDA where clients come to the CEDA offices and they are taken through the information regarding business. All the business advisors and the regional facilitators go out there. Within the department, there's also a team that goes out there to give people information at certain intervals. Yes, COVID affected the whole program, but we hope to get it back running again. The second question from Mr. Brook regarding linking cooperatives with the markets. Yes, it's an ongoing process. I won't say we have this particular number, but it's a work in progress, and we realize that it is important. It's part of some of the programs that we are having. The supplier development program that is there. We also have issues with procurement, linking our clients, to access procurement within the different departments or government departments. That's all I can say. Thank you. Are you answered, sir? Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Coker. I'm not seeing any new hands. If there are any, I'm gonna keep my eye on them. Look, I think that we have had a good webinar for today, and there's some other ideas that are coming to my mind, and I want to test them. I mean, people could respond to them. So the ERRP, as I said when I was speaking earlier on, is a document that already exists. Actually, it's a plan that already exists. And I think that, of course, there is no section in the ERRP that talks directly to the forms of businesses that will be supported. So what is intended is that the ERRP must cover the economy as a whole. And there's a lot of then businesses that or opportunities that will end up going to established businesses. There is a work stream, there is an area, a focus on startups, social enterprises, small business, small and medium enterprises, as well as cooperatives. They are clustered together. And in that work stream, there is an intention basically of generalizing opportunities across society in South Africa. Now, I think that what this seminar is showing, I think for me, this is what I'm from the chair or from the point of view of a moderator. The presentation, like in the first presentation by Ms. Coker, indicated, as I was showing, that there's an ecosystem and there are services that are being provided, which are very well designed and clearly targeted in terms of beneficiaries, being the cooperatives themselves. But the cooperatives, there's also geographic or spatial targeting, which basically says there has to be services to townships and rural areas. There's targeting of also demographic groups. There's targeting of youth, there's targeting of women, there's targeting of people with disability. One of the issues I think this webinar must note is the fact that, and I'm saying, okay, my responsibility at Network constituencies includes mobilization. It included mobilization for the Job Summit Framework Agreement, and now the mobilization for ERRP. the way we work, we are not implementers, but we are advocating for the constituents. And I can tell you, I've crisscrossed the country. And one of the things that I can tell you for a fact is that information is hard to come by. And information also is hard to come by, even in government. There's been many instances where you go to districts and the districts say to you that we know that small business development is doing this with CETA, with CFA, and so on and so forth. Now, I think that we need to basically, part of the takeaway from this seminar, and in particular, if NDA is going to coordinate some of this work for itself in working with us as maybe like social partners, is that information is key. There's too many people who intend to start cooperatives, but they don't even know how to incorporate, let alone then that they don't know what type of support exists for cooperatives once they are registered. That's why cooperatives register and never do anything. But there are cooperatives that actually like do get information. And I think that we need to think in terms of how, if, for instance, we have got nationally the 52 districts, including the 8 metros, how then do we get to reach all these districts? And how do we leverage the district development model with its one planning, the one plan system that basically also includes things like economic development, as well as information services and so on and so forth. So that's one of the areas I think that we need to be getting our heads around, because it's not enough to say that there is an enabling legislation, there are services, there are policies as well, but they are not getting to the people. So that is one of the areas that I think that this the NDA must take note of. The second area is actually the fact that there are services, for instance, in social development. And in social development, recently I've been having conversations with DDG Nechipale, who is the head of the program that Mr. Mpele was talking to. And the conversations are at 2 levels. For instance, the programs that were shared by the Department of Social Development are also implemented by by KZN provincial government through a program called RASET. But although, I mean, the private sector is the access to market, the private sector has provided access to market for RASET. So producers actually, as well as pack houses and so on and so forth, can now, they know where to take their produce to in the agricultural space. And cooperatives are supported, in fact, to basically produce and pack and then distribute. But there are issues that relate to the skills and that lead to proper quality of produce. There is a lot of other capacity that cooperatives are found wanting on in relation to management. And in our own, as constituents, in our own work, in talking to RASET and other programs like at municipal level, we are finding that sometimes cooperatives are not advised well. There's a cooperative that in fact has got permits in the south coast of KZN, which has got permits for fishing more than 7 species of fish. But the problem why it's not even moving a single step is because they were advised to incorporate as a cooperative of 105 people. So it's completely difficult. I mean, it's a mass meeting just to have a meeting of a single cooperative. So, and when you are looking at the work that is supposed to be done, it could be broken into different value chains and enable cooperatives that then will basically do the actual work in fishing, as well maybe in diving for crayfish and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is that there's also a problem that the knowledge, the repositories of knowledge, they could be NDA capacity building, they could be CETA, they could be Department of Small Business Development and so on. They are really not properly engaged when these cooperatives are designed and when they are provided actual opportunities, and you are sitting then 2 years down the line with a cooperative that has not done anything with a permit, where is the opportunities real? So part of the things that we must then be looking at is how our services translate into helping the people who need the services most to get started and then set up themselves as sustainable and equitable businesses. So those are some of my initial ideas. There's a skills issue here. So skills is, of course, spread across the system. There's a sitter system. In the sitter system, most of the sitters have got what you call the skills development plans. And these skills development plans annually have got targets, for instance, for rural, what you call beneficiaries, for NPOs, for CPOs, and all of those. And they are not meeting those targets. And some of these targets could well be utilized, because some of the skills development plan are like according to that sector. But if we are dealing with a sector like services sector that deals with plaza shops, that deals with saloons and so on and so forth, so, like the urban type cooperative, we could benefit as the cooperative sector in actually working with sitters, getting to understand what their plans are, and then leveraging the funding that is already existing, and it's annual, this funding. But at a secondary level, I think that the opportunity provided by community education and training colleges that are already, like some are springing up all over the place, but there's gonna be these dedicated 52 ones which are per metro and district. I think that we also need to work in such a way that if we are the cooperative sector, we go and locate the necessary training for cooperatives. The necessary training for cooperatives could be on the legislation, as we saw the offerings of a Department of Small Business Development and its agencies on the legislation. And then the training, which is about building their capacity to manage, to take decisions, to run, as well, like locating and other entrepreneurship skills that would be necessary for cooperatives. So we basically need to take advantage of that. Each of these 52 CETs or community education and training colleges are expected then to define the comparative advantages of each of those districts. So we may then be able to support cooperatives with opportunities in line. I mean, the example is that in coastal municipalities, there are comparative advantages that have got to do with the ocean's economy. Then there's also others that may be basically specific to a region. It could be agriculture and so on and so forth. But there are also regions or districts which are mining districts. So you could then also leveraging that comparative advantage of mining, beneficial use of mining waste and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying here is that we have got what I can call a scattered firewood all over the place. And we could do a lot and help cooperatives a great deal and help the country if we basically collect this firewood, which is all of us, partnering in a meaningful way to provide the support to cooperatives, from skilling them, providing opportunities to them, building their capacity and helping to give them the knowledge that will sustain them so that they become sustainable businesses that are contributing by virtue of also ability to get many participants. Then we could be contributing to reduction of unemployment and creation of sustainable job and employment opportunities. So those are some of the ideas. I'm still checking my screen if there are hands that are raised. Monty, you are acknowledged. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I picked a very interesting lesson from Lee with respect to the WFP program that she shared with us. Number one, I, in my concluding remarks, made mention of some of the shortcomings we have in most of the South African cooperatives in their formation. What is the lesson? You get people who are productive at household level, be it family, be it producers in communities. Once they show that potential, then in an effort to cooperate, they bring their produce together. Then there is aggregation. Upon the realization of their strength collectively, then they form and organize themselves into cooperatives. And then they can share storage, transportation, value addition into their primary produce and access markets, get better incomes, create sustainable livelihoods, generate income, and as such, you get lesser mortality on the cooperatives. Contrary to that, most of the cooperatives that we form in South Africa, it's people who come together because they are trying to access the cooperative's incentive grant. And then they will come together, they've never worked together, there is nothing that brings them together. And also, I think Mr. Nhlanhla alluded to even the project in terms of the financial is not economically viable to have 100 people benefiting from this fisheries project they are part of. As a result, the capacity to produce is so limited, the economies of scale are not enabling them to be in an economically viable venture. So as such, that cooperative is bound to fail even before it starts working. So I wish as we move forward, continue to strengthen, bring together the pieces of wood, as my colleague alluded to. We are also careful to make sure that we eliminate those problems that continuously undermine all our efforts in supporting cooperatives in South Africa. Thank you.
Miss Lee, I don't know if you would like to comment on the observation by Mr. Mpele. I don't know if Miss Lee is still on the call. If not, okay. Look, it's fine. If we're not, I was trying to push the presentations to be fast on the hope that we will need to give people time to make their comments and engage. But it does seem like my expectations were not to be met. What we will then do, I think that we don't have to keep people longer than it is necessary on this webinar. It's a first webinar, as was indicated by the acting CEO, Mr. Magongo, and it's getting the ball rolling. And we as stakeholders in cooperative development sector need to work closer in partnership with one another, so that we deliver a better product to cooperatives and actually we help really develop the cooperatives. So I think that there is subsequent engagements that will happen. We on our side also as a network constituency, we have got cooperatives as part of the network constituency. and we will engage, including taking up test challenge by Mr. Vadia, head of the business unit South Africa, on some of the things that could be done and assistance that could be needed. We'll through the BUSA about that and share it among the constituents, which is the cooperatives. Now I'm going to actually end my part now and hand over to Mr. Tamingwe, and I do hope Mr. going to indicate that now that we have started this engagement, how do we sustain it, and how then do we also take it into action of things that we should be doing after working, so that it just doesn't become a talk shop that ends there. I do want to thank for their very helpful and useful information and knowledge that they've shared. Thank also the research team, research information, to utilize this as data for some of having going. We saw some recommendations, and that can be translated into immediate actions, and some of them could then be linked with what we are already doing with the economic construction and recovery plan. I do also want to thank the participants that have engaged with us, both in terms of chairs and contributions. For my part, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Tamingwenya to give the vote of thanks, and I do hope that I don't have to come back so that I can thank the participants and close this part of the task that I was having. And after Mr. Ngwenya, if Mr. Congo has to be the one who closes, you will hand over to him. If it's you who has to close it, please do so. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. Over to you, Mr.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much for the sterling work that you've done. Mine is a very simple one, in which I, on behalf of the National Development Agency as leadership, I'm challenged a bit in terms of my video, which I've been asked to start. And I'm saying thank you very much, coordinator. Mine is a very simple one, in which I, on behalf of the National Development Agency leadership, thank all the participants, starting from the panelists right through to people that have taken their time to be with us today and share their experiences and actually input in terms of the process which we've engaged with. Thanking my team, my research team, in terms, led by Dr. Krai, in terms of this particular webinar, in terms of how they've pulled things together and where we are. And thanking, of course, the consultants that we've worked with in Red Flank, and all of those that have given us their bit in terms of responding to the research work that we've done and the likes. There was a question raised in terms of where to from here. From the NDA side, these type of webinars and engagements are policy shifting webinars and dialogues that we engage with to try and get the relevant parties, first and foremost, to recognize what in this particular webinar has been raised as the functionality of the different government departments in which we stand in silos in the work that we do instead of starting to work together. It raises issues of some of the entities which are mother bodies of like SANACO and others, of the urgency which is needed in terms of the sector itself to come together and start to deliberate around the structuring of the sector in such a way that we are able to bring government resources to the sector and the sector to be able to engage with government and become this entity that government works with as a community entity that is right at grassroots level, that is able to bring change, and more for us as NDA, be able to change the structure of poverty in our communities. We are going to be putting together a report in this regard of the people that have been around, the comments that were put together, and the different role players that have extended themselves in terms of starting to say, here we are ready, like the old stalwart, Mr. Cascovaria, given his background of where he comes from with the struggle and the like, of standing up and saying, I'm prepared to work with anybody who's prepared to come through an NDA. I'm throwing a challenge to you to say, whenever you're ready, come through, let's sit down and look at. These are the type of access this type of dialogue and webinar starts to pull together. These are the type of players it starts to identify and bring towards the same environment of opening up and starting discussions that takes us to a policy directive and a policy initiative in terms of how do we then pull together and change the policies that are hindering, or the policies that are supposed to be assisting in this regard. How do we bring small business into the table as well and say, you are mandated with this particular bit on small business and cooperatives? How do we then pull all the relevant players, the funding agencies that are in this regard, to start to speak towards a common structure of how do we move things forward? I'm going to stop there. I'm not a presenter. Mine was to say thank you, and thank you very much for all those that were in this webinar on behalf of the National.
Thank you, Babum Dimande. It looks like you got cut, but we heard all the kind words as you were closing and thanking us. I'm not sure if Chair is still here. On my side, I could hear Mr. Ngwenya was getting cut.
Okay, I'm still here, and I did see that Mr. Ngwenya got cut, and he was concluding, he was basically saying that he's not a speaker, so he's done his work. We will take it as that, and I think now I have to declare the webinar officially closed. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, moderator.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Kajen.
Tabang, I think you can end the session from your side.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.